You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for another edition and another week of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states we call America and from across the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am your indefatigable, your ever-vigilant, your burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're back. It is November 8th. It's just past 7 a.m. Eastern. Jamarl, how you doing?
What's going on? Not too much. Doing all right.
Good.
You had a good weekend?
I did. I went up to New York City with my brother.
Nice.
Yeah, we took the bus up and back. It was a good little trip.
How was it? Was it as bad as Ted Roll?
I'll be honest,
I think even Goodwin put it.
It wasn't that terrible. But you know, I don't live there, and so my A and B isn't sort of that on the point as somebody who lives there does. And of course, I'm not inside the culture. But Jack and I went up. We hung out in Manhattan for a little bit. Mostly hung out in Brooklyn, and I don't know. The impression that I have of New York is that it always has those kinds of gritty problems.
Yeah.
But maybe it's gotten worse. It was hard for me to tell. It seemed good being there, though.
When was the last time you've been there?
About 2 years ago, I think.
Okay, so it was too much time. It wasn't enough time where you could see this kind of trend line of things change.
Well, I think it would be exactly the right time, but the last time I was there was only for a little bit. It was like for a night, basically, kind of overnight.
Yeah. It wasn't enough time to soak it all in.
Yeah, maybe have you been there extensively sometime in recent history? Because maybe you should go up and check it out.
I think the last time I went was back in 2008 or something like that.
Oh, yeah, that's a long time.
It's been a while ago, yeah. So I haven't seen it for a while, but that's very interesting. Were the stores open?
There are a decent number of stores. Yeah, okay. Most businesses looking around on Google Maps and just walking around the street, surely some storefronts were closed, and I saw graffiti all over the place. But again, I can't. That's maybe just New York in general.
Right.
I can't
New York.
Exactly. I can't disambiguate the two. But it was open.
Very cool.
Definitely people around.
Yeah.
Anyway, good trip. Glad you had a good weekend, too. Let's get into headlines. First up in COVID news. Yesterday in the United States, there were 22,085 new COVID cases reported, also 132 new deaths from COVID-19. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 72,436 cases per day. That is effectively no change from the average 2 weeks ago. 58% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 67% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 46,449,331 people across the United States. It has killed 754,051 people in the U.S. The Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that researchers are investigating a link between COVID-19 vaccines and myocarditis. The CDC has listed on its website an incidence of myocarditis among some of those usually receiving their second vaccination, particularly among adolescents and young males, and usually of mild cases that resolve quickly. Myocarditis, basically heart inflammation. I mean, and so you remember all the people talking about the spike proteins and all that stuff?
Yeah.
There is definitely something there.
Yeah.
It's just how serious it is, basically. They're saying it's not that serious. They're saying the incidence is pretty low and that usually these cases resolve quickly. Anyway, they're still recommending that anyone who gets these symptoms visit the hospital. Those symptoms include chest pain, shortness of breath, and the feeling of a fast or fluttering heart.
Yeah.
Go check that out, basically.
Yeah, go check that out.
Yes. Yeah. And this is being reported. Also, a couple things I could throw in here. It's just too much to add into the headline, but I was looking into this a little bit. There was a report also late last week, I think it was on Friday, it was like NBC, where earlier in the year there was a study done on cats and dogs where they were giving, that was actually late last year, they were giving cats and dogs vaccines, specifically the mRNA type vaccines, and they saw myocarditis, symptoms of it, and the actual medical condition itself in the cats and dogs when they were giving it to them.
Interesting.
So there were early warnings about it. Israel's been looking into this since April of this year, but apparently it doesn't, it seems like it's happening, and so it seems like
issue with
people
COVID
are getting
in general, though?
I don't know.
Okay, because I remember the inflammation thing being an issue of COVID in general.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious about whether the myocarditis is the effect purely related to the aspect of the vaccine that's similar to COVID. I don't know. That's an interesting thing. We're going to have to get Ollinger or somebody to explain.
I really want to. Yeah, we should get him. Exactly. On national news, moving there, on Friday, the House passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework Bill. That's the BIF bill, without passing the Build Back Better spending plan, the contents of which have been the subject of a months-long competition between progressive and centrist Democrats, or right-leaning Democrats, or whatever, however you want to put it. I don't know. No schedule has been set yet for voting on the latter bill. What do you think, Jamarl? Sometime this week, probably.
That's what they're saying. They're trying to say at least with a week. Congress is going on vacation, apparently. And when they get back, supposedly the Congressional Budget Office
needs to give it a score. Exactly. It doesn't have a score right now.
Right, and that's what they were. So you had these right-wing Democrats was like, well, we promise to vote for it if it gets a score, and if it comes back to zero, meaning no budget neutral. And so that's what's supposed to be taking place right now. Jayapal and some of the other squad members basically had just enough votes to. How can I say this? When Nancy Pelosi and sometimes the Speaker of the House, they protect certain members of your caucus. And so they would be like, all right, they'll be harmed if they vote for this. So we have just enough votes to break this over the finish line to allow them to basically not vote for it. And so you had members of the squad like AOC, Ilhan Omar, and a few others that basically didn't vote for it. You got 12 Republicans voting for it in order to put it over the finish line.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. Sometimes this language and the things that they use are slippery. I mean, for them to say, yes, we have an agreement that if this thing comes back budget neutral, we'll vote for it. Okay, what if it's not budget neutral?
What if it's a little bit off?
Yeah, who knows? We'll see. I mean, just by virtue of them doing this so much in the open, and that other congressional members and the press and everybody else knows it, maybe that's enough emphasis or pressure for them guys to pass it. Even if they pass it in the House, you still have the Senate. Manchin has given no agreements on this at all. So we'll see.
We'll come back to it.
Yeah.
This, obviously we'll be talking about this, of course, later today, too. Other headlines to get to. The FBI on Saturday raided the home of James O'Keefe. James O'Keefe, the founder of Project Veritas. This comes after the FBI raided the homes of two Project Veritas associates late last week. Project Veritas is a controversial media organization that works with informants and publishes private interactions with left-leaning organizations. The FBI is investigating Ashley Biden's diary, which Project Veritas had received. Jamarl, have you been following this story?
No, I haven't. Who is Ashley Biden?
Ashley Biden, Hunter Biden's sister, I believe.
Oh, okay.
That whole thing, Biden's daughter.
So Hunter can't keep his laptops to himself for whatever reason. I've never lost even one laptop, let alone three. And now they have her diary?
Yeah. Well, no, they had her diary for a bit, and then they basically gave it back because it was like procured illegally, is my understanding of it. They were like, no, we can't publish this. They didn't even publish it, but then they're being investigated because they received it. Yeah. But then there's this other take, which is, why the hell is the FBI raiding Project Veritas just to get information about the diary of the president's daughter?
Yeah.
Why are they doing that?
I'm curious. How did they even get the diary in the first place?
Do we live in an absolute monarchy where the king can just send the royal guards out, go investigate how they got my daughter's diary? That seems like what it is. Do you see what I'm saying?
I don't know the legalities around it, though. Like, I don't know what took place between the two things.
Don't they have better things to do than find who got Ashley Biden's diary? Isn't that very clearly just a political favor for the president? Isn't that all?
I mean, anyway. I don't know the legalities around it. I mean, it could very well be. I mean, look, when Hunter Biden lost his laptop, what did Biden do? He sent one of his goons. Biden wasn't even president yet.
Secret Service.
Yeah, sent one of the guys from the Secret Service who said supposedly he wasn't working on behalf of the president and this type of stuff. So we were already in this kind of shady territory with these kind of government actors. But I don't know, you could have a total point. I mean, I'm curious about the legalities around this. I really am. Like, why didn't they publish it? A publisher or reporter or a news organization can get data that somewhat illegally procured, and it can still run it. I mean, so I'm curious about what the legalities around this being. But yeah, you might not be wrong. I mean, this could very well be the president basically saying, hey, hassle that guy for getting my daughter's diary.
Yes. And I've heard theories about this, but who knows? Theories are theories. Dime a dozen. Rappers Travis Scott and Drake are being sued after 8 people died and dozens of others were injured during a stampede at an overcrowded Travis Scott concert. Travis Scott continued to perform during the stampede, and as medical professionals arrived at the scene. And then among a certain circle on right-wing Twitter, I saw people speculating that this was like a satanic ritual, which is always a little bit...
Jeez.
I want to comment on that in some sense.
What, the stampede? Was
There are weird coincidences, and plenty of people online will find weird coincidences, but I'm just sad to see a lot of people immediately going in for, like, I don't know,
the weirdest possible
the irrational, spiritualistic explanations for things that are ascientific and reflect the degeneration of the, like, critical mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where people stop seeking material explanations for events and start thinking in terms of gods, like mystery cults and the decline of the Roman Empire. I was talking about this last week. You weren't on, but
I'm curious. What's the thing? I mean, what are they trying to attribute it to?
What are they trying to say?
Satan.
The symbology in music in general these days is kind of weird.
Yeah.
You know, you got, like, controversial horned figures on the stage. They're trying to say his rapping.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I saw people making the argument that this was like a ritual to try to kill these people, and it was getting traction. And I was like, yeah, and you know, it's an extension of the whole QAnon mindset. Anyway,
wow. That's wow.
But it's sad these people died. That's the first and second thing. And then third, it's sad that Travis Scott just kept playing. I don't know. The Supreme Court will be hearing a case today about the government's ability to get lawsuits thrown out of court by claiming they would reveal secrets threatening to national security. The case involves a group of Muslim men from Southern California who filed a class action lawsuit claiming that the FBI spied on them and hundreds of others following the September 11th attacks. They claimed religious discrimination. The case was dismissed by a lower court due to the government saying that if it went forward, it would reveal quote-unquote state secrets. In international news, this morning, former American President Barack Obama will address the COP26 climate change conference, which has been ongoing for more than a week at this point. The event will be closing out this Friday. In sports news, on Friday, while appearing on the Pat McAfee show, Rogers said that he was, quote, in the crosshairs of the woke mob right now, end quote, over his vaccination status. This is Aaron Rodgers, of course, and that the media was on a quote-unquote witch hunt to find out which players were vaccinated. He had previously announced back in August that he was, quote-unquote, immunized, but it turns out he's unvaccinated and has been following protocols as if he was vaccinated. In other words, not wearing masks in certain conditions where he really should be. And for those who aren't familiar, Aaron Rodgers, American football quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. In holiday news, in terms of what holidays it is today, it is a bet and aid punsters day, cook something bold and pungent day, International Tongue Twister Day, and National Cappuccino Day. And there you go.
Cook something bold and pungent.
Yeah, and
I love that.
And a bet and aid punsters. Bet and aid as if it's like a criminal act, which for some I'm sure it is. Anyway, we got to close this out. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines.
That's funny. That's funny.
Oh, yeah. And then Cordell, you're saying it was not a satanic ritual. It was just a bunch of mosh pits, which, yeah, that's the thing. You can also make a case, of course, why are there so many people at this event? I mean, you know, COVID stuff is weird these days, but like you can make the social distancing argument. Then again, maybe everybody just rushes forward to the stage. And even if you have social distancing principles in place, are people actually going to respect them?
Probably not.
I don't know.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, they don't respect those in the airport. I seriously would doubt they were going to expect them at a concert. Also, if you're in a mosh pit, I don't think you're wearing masks in a mosh pit, are you? I mean, just people just pushing each other, but they, maintain the mask thing just in case. Also, if he's watching these guys in a mosh pit, maybe he thought that the mosh pit or the riot was just the mosh pit getting rowdy. I don't know. I don't know what's in his head.
What I heard that was weird is that, like ambulances had showed up and there was a big commotion.
Rhymes.
But granted, Cordell's saying Astroworld is an event. Producer Cordell is saying Astroworld, which is the event that this stuff was going. It's a big event. It draws up big crowds. And to my thinking, I can see the other side of this, which is I've been at music festivals. Ambulances get called out sometimes.
All the time,
So
right.
maybe he, unaware of what's going on, is like, okay, it's just business as usual. I don't know. But it's a bad look regardless.
Yeah. It doesn't necessarily look good, especially if it's a stampede and what they're calling a stampede.
Oh, yeah.
For me, in my head, it's people running, not necessarily just people in a mosh pit.
8 people died, dozens injured, that kind of thing.
He's still spitting rhymes.
Yeah,
was
exactly.
that directly in front of the stage where you could see it, or was it somewhere else nearby?
I think it was pretty close to the stage, but I don't know the specifics.
Yeah, that looks bad.
I haven't looked at the video.
That looks pretty bad.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Anyway, with that, I'm going to take us into a break. We are going to be coming back into Jamarl's monologue, his soapbox segment. We usually get into a quick back and forth after that. And then we'll be speaking with Carl Jha at 7:30, talking about China. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the D.C. area, or for that matter, visiting the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. We often have this conversation about bipartisanship and whether or not there are things that come up that can be bipartisan, or if at this point in our history, or for that matter, the lineage of humankind, that everything is political and everything on some level has sides. I mean, for God's sake, climate change has become a political football, along with all sorts of other cultural issues. One of the things that Biden said he was going to do is be more bipartisan in the way that he ran. And to his credit, he did get across the bipartisan infrastructure bill. However, the reconciliation bill is entirely going to be passed by only Democrats. And so whatever one want to think of bipartisanship is not necessarily the easiest thing to come by in Congress. However, there is one issue that has been shown or shows a propensity for bipartisanship that has lived up to this point, and that's the UFO issue. Initially, Marco Rubio puts in a provision into the National Defense Authorization Act that gets the Department of DNI, Office Director of National Intelligence, to release a preliminary report on UAPs or UAPs and UFOs. Basically, they're the same thing. I prefer to call them UFOs. I don't necessarily see the point in changing the name, but it is what it is. It was basically a UAP preliminary report. Now, this was massive because it basically organized the governmental structure to get a report given to the public. One aspect of it was classified. The other aspect was unclassified. Congress members, on top of that, have been getting briefings all throughout the, let's say, the last several years on things that we have not been able to see. Some of these things including videos, and some of these things are apparently including videos that are relatively up close, not to mention talking to the people who are in the military and otherwise that were around it. You had Gallego, who also extended it in 2022, another provision into the NDAA to expand the government's procurement of information, for that matter, the way that the information will be delivered to the public. And we have another extension on this, Christian Gillibrand. Christian Gillibrand is part of the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, so she would be one of those people that have seen behind the scenes and seen what these guys actually have in getting some of those classified briefings. And she has put in a far-reaching amendment into the NDAA. What she wants, basically, and look, it's a good idea, and it's something that all of these guys should get behind. Think about what we're talking about for the moment. Our nuclear installations are some of the most sensitive installations on this planet. And yet, we have things that have been invading these installations without us being able to do anything about it, and for that matter, without even the Pentagon or the Department of Defense explaining what it is, when and how often have the nuclear sites been breached, and for that matter, what provisions have you taken to try to prevent those nuclear sites from being breached? No, I don't necessarily think it's an attack on America or an attack on the world, but I do think from the standpoint of the Department of Defense, those are questions that should be asked. And if you're in Congress, it is the most rational thing in the world when you see all of these Navy pilots coming out, when you see all of these videos coming out, when you have the Department or the Director of National Intelligence creating a report with every other alphabet soup signing on to it saying, yes, this is legitimate and these things represent technology. It is insane to believe that your congressional members could sit there and be uncurious as to what it is. Whether it's us or whether it's not, it's a question that should be answered. And both of those positions are rather profound. So I applaud Christian Gillibrand's addition to the National Defense Authorization Act. And I even applaud the bipartisan nature of this, with Democrats and Republicans getting on board to look further into this issue. Gillibrand is just the latest to come aboard. So what she wants is basically to establish an anomaly surveillance and resolution office. Now, this office will assume the responsibilities of the Navy-led Unidentified Area Phenomena Task Force, meaning at the point where the task force ends, this office is the office that she wants to basically take over the responsibilities. She wants this to be a central repository with reports, including adverse physiological effects. Think about what that means. That basically means she has gotten information that when people are encountering the craft, some of these people get sick, ill, or have some other kind of deleterious effects to their physical person. Yeah, this is how real this has gotten, where these are the things that we're basically talking about. She also wants more democratic accountability for these reports, with an unclassified version being introduced to the public, I believe, like once a year, or at the very least with a certain degree of regularity. Now, a lot of this, the repository and introducing this stuff to the public, has to do with bringing down the stigma with people releasing information, meaning I saw this, I was in this place, I was a military officer. Many a times over the last 50, 60 years, if a person recounted that, that person could somehow have deleterious effects to their particular career, despite how high up they are or how proficient they were at their jobs. We pay these people, what, hundreds of millions of dollars of training to be observers. And yet, when many of these people, many of which guarding our nuclear facilities, guarding these military bases, say something about it, they could be called crazy, or at the very least, taken or lost of credibility. Well, it's time for that to stop. And part and parcel to the repository is in order to undermine that particular process. Even the DNI report made the point of saying we need to get rid of the giggle factor on this. It's hampering our ability to have scientific investigation of this particular issue. Yes, very, very true. Again, Gillibrand, I applaud her for that. The office will be supported by a new, quote, Aerial and Transmedium Phenomena Advisory Committee made up of government and private sector. Now, this is pretty profound. The transmedium thing comes into play with one of the videos that was released recently that the Pentagon authenticated, saying, yes, this is real, with a device that basically flying in the air and goes underwater. This also goes to reports from the Nimitz that basically saw something plop out the water, and later on, Fravor was engaging this particular object, meaning they have reports, even Elizondo has made mention of reports of vehicles that are going ridiculous speeds in air and then going ridiculous speeds in water without any kind of diminutive ization, and I don't think that's the right word for it, but basically without any loss of capability in the capabilities of the craft. She even put the word Aerial and Transmedium Phenomena Advisory Committee. This is pretty astonishing. 3 members of the committee will be selected by NASA administration, and 3 will be headed by Harvard University Galileo Project for Systemic Scientific Search for Evidence of Extraterrestrial Technological Artifacts. This is by Professor Avi Loeb, who's been on the show twice that we've had the opportunity to have a conversation with. Maybe we need to bring him on and have a conversation about this one. This is a pretty big deal. Loeb has been going out looking for artifacts and structures in the universe and in the galaxy to attune or come to this notion that if there's something out there, we need to change our methodology and our point of view into looking for stuff as opposed to just kind of assuming nothing exists. The assumption is wrong. We need to start assuming that something should be out there. It's pretty awesome that she's looking at this as a private and public partnership with the notion of NASA and the notion of Harvard, or let's say Loeb, and his capabilities. The physiological effects reference suggests Gillibrand is concerned over some reports about health. I mentioned that one before. You have another part of this. The new office will be in charge of, quote, evaluating links between unidentified area phenomena and adversarial foreign governments, other foreign governments, or non-state actors. It directs the office's pursuits of, quote, scientific theories to account for characteristics and performance of unidentified area phenomena that exceeds the known state of the art in science or technology, including in the areas of propulsion, aerodynamic control, signatures, structures, materials, sensors, countermeasure, weapons, electronics, and power generation, to provide a future for potential future investments to replicate any such characteristics and performance. Think about what she's saying there. Basically, the aspects of the technology that basically blows our technology away, that we can't necessarily compete with, that we don't necessarily know how it works or how it acts, why it can be transmedium, why it can pop out of existence or something to that effect. Basically, to figure out how it's doing what it's doing with the thought of replicating that particular technology in our own work of either counterintelligence or or defensive capabilities and everything else. That's rather profound. She's basically saying we need to learn as much as we could to build our own UFO or something with an American aircraft with the capabilities of a UFO. That's pretty astonishing. Gillibrand's language also gives an implicit reference to the confident belief of those in the U.S. government and military who have studied the subject, and they don't believe that it's Russia, and they don't believe it's China. I tell you this, what you don't get as a person writing a document like this, if they believe that it's just a foreign actor, and again, even if it is a foreign actor, it is that much more important that we know that. This is a mystery, and it's one that needs to be solved. Gillibrand is on the Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, meaning she's had access to all sorts of classified briefings where she would know what's behind the scenes, what these guys actually have, and whether or not we need to go further in trying to understand what it is. And that answer clearly is decidedly yes. On one last point, the government attention to UFO connection point with nuclear weapons. So I went to the meeting with Silas, and I think it was 4 other military guys that were basically talking about their interactions with weird phenomena at nuclear facilities. Silas was the keynote speaker, but you had Bob Johnson, you had a few other people that were there. And basically, they made this point of saying there's an interest in nuclear weapons and UFOs. And this is something that seems to happen over and over again. A gentleman named Hastings wrote the book on this, basically showing not just in the United States, but also in foreign countries, where there seems to be a connection between the two things. Well, Gillibrand is requiring the office to provide a, quote, number of reported incidents and descriptions thereof of unidentified area phenomena associated with military nuclear assets, including strategic nuclear weapons and nuclear-powered ships and submarines. She also requests similar reporting on UFO incidents at civilian nuclear sites, which some government officials believe has been of particular interest to the most sophisticated of UFOs. This is not a singular party issue. This is bipartisan. And you've had either the likes of Rubio and Gillibrand, both of which are mainstream Democrats, or for that matter, Republicans, that gets across this is not necessarily a fringe issue anymore. This is something that Congress has started to investigate that much more fully. Shane, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, I saw this thing, and I was like, whoa, Kristen Gillibrand did this? I've never seen her show any interest in it, but for that matter, I never saw Rubio show any interest in it until he put in that kind of just slipped in the provision of the NDA and didn't kind of a no look like nobody saw me do this. But again, Gallego had did something like this. This was another representative that had put in a provision to get rid of the UAP task force and replace it with this kind of other office by the Department of Defense. Gillibrand's goes further than even his. And so you got some flying around nuclear facilities. Do you want to know what it is? Yeah or nay? And whether it's us or whether it's not us, I would make the case that if it's not us, if it's us, it's even a bigger deal on some level to figure out what that is. And maybe this is one of those things that Congress can come together on as a unified front without the partisanship that we're typically accustomed to. What are your thoughts?
Well, good to hear that the one thing we can come together on is that there are scary things happening and we don't know what's causing them. And I don't know if it's scary. I don't know, man. This whole thing has been weird. And in some sense, it's good. I guess it's good to see more emotion on this because that means it's not dying on the vine or whatever. Yeah. It's actually coming to something. There's traction. But at the same time, I have no idea what this means. I don't know any more about what this means than I did when we started talking about this, however long ago it was, a year plus ago.
Yeah. No,
so
that's fair.
I don't know what to do with it. I don't know. I hope that if they are aliens, that they don't serve man.
I don't think the people know that one. That's the Twilight Zone episode. To serve man. It's a cookbook. It's a cookbook.
Exactly.
No, man, I think it's fascinating. I mean, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think anybody, at least not in the way this is being explained in somewhat of an overt way, gets it. It just seems like they're at the stage of, okay, we need to research this more. And in order to research this more, this is kind of their way of saying, okay, how do we go about researching it more? I think from the standpoint of somebody in Congress, especially if you're in this notion of defense, it's somewhat of a rational act to say, what do you mean something is in our installations? What do you mean you can't do anything about it? What have you done about it up to this point? Are you doing anything to take countermeasures to prevent our installations from being violated, et cetera, et cetera? That just seems the most natural thing in the world to me. It seems weirder for like the Department of Defense or the Pentagon to just act as if nothing to see here, folks. Which, when like Luke kind of made this point, like, what do you mean there's nothing to see here? Just a buzzing our ships. There's stuff buzzing through our installations.
I want to hit you with something. This is from the audience. I'm just seeing a couple people, you know, this is sort of pushback. They're like, don't we have more important stuff to do than talk about aliens? You know, doesn't Congress have more important stuff to do, that like healthcare, housing, those issues? What's your take on that?
Is Congress doing those things? No, they're not.
No,
they're not doing those things. Not to mention, they've passed the Build Back Better plan, so I don't necessarily see the difference in these things. It's not like Congress is occupied with UFOs all of a sudden. That's not really it.
Yeah, I don't see this taking 99% of people's attention.
No,
it seems
it's
like
not. I don't even see it taking 1%.
Yeah, it's a pretty sidelined issue. So I don't really see that. You could make, like, what? Well, I guess, why don't you make the same argument about, I'm sure they spend a lot more time talking about military budget stuff.
Yeah.
We don't hear about that as much because, it, you know.
They just pass it in a whim.
They pass it, and necessarily it's the kind of conversation you'd have behind closed doors at the Pentagon or whatever. But my point is that stuff presumably happens all the time. And then you get something that's slightly more interesting and exciting and maybe revolutionary like this. And I get, I'm not on that line. I think investigating this seems easy. It seems like the kind of thing that you could do as a marginal project with all of the resources of the government and potentially get something revolutionary out of it. And it's not like it's going to prevent you from doing pretty much anything else.
And that's right, exactly. It's that part. It doesn't prevent you doing anything else. And let's be very clear. It is utterly profound. Like, whether it is us or not, both of those answers are profound. I mean, we're talking about stuff where even within the way that she explained it, okay, how is it blowing past our state-of-the-art technological capabilities? Again, whether it's us or it's not.
And through the language, it's not Russia or China. The belief is not, it's not one of these major competitor nations.
No,
so
she doesn't believe it. I mean, she's seen the behind-the-scenes stuff. Many of these guys have. And things that they've been seeing images, videos, etc. That is not these kind of grainy stuff flying through the air or whatever. If she's going to put a provision like this, she's basically putting herself or her political credibility on the line, which I don't think she will do willy-nilly. Look, whatever you want to think, this is one of the most profound and important items in human history. And I suppose you could say, you know, hey, shouldn't we be doing something? Well, you can always say that. There's always the provision where you can say, shouldn't we be doing this or shouldn't we be doing that? I hate to tell you this, we're not getting the healthcare stuff done. None of those things that you're talking about getting done are getting done. So you may as well do something profound in the meantime.
I don't know if I would take that exact line, but I hear you. And something, I hear you. We got to close this one out.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So coming up is going to be more than 300 leaders of the Communist Party are meeting in China for the 6th plenum of the Central Committee. Now, this is considered to be important because it comes just before the National Congress takes in effect. The National Congress takes place every 5 years. What they're expected to pass is a resolution on the history of the first 100 years of the Communist Party. And this would also be somewhat of a platform for Xi Jinping to take advantage of a 2018 provision that would allow him to extend the amount of time that he stays in office for another 5-year term. Up to this point, they had a 2-year term limit. To have a conversation on what this plenum is going to be about, why it's important, and what does it mean to have this kind of resolution on the history of the first 100 years of the Communist Party. To have a conversation about it, we're joined with Carl Jha. He's the host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. Carl, what's going on, my man?
Hey, how are you? Thank you for inviting me back.
No, absolutely. You're the first person I thought of when I was reading this, because the West often have a tendency to look at this stuff with a dark lens. And in the article that I was reading, though, they still had to admit Xi Jinping is extremely popular, and his priorities are going to be, you know, lifting people out of poverty, dealing with this kind of modern technology, not to mention military strength, et cetera, et cetera. explaining why he's very popular. But of course, they always puts the stuff in somewhat of a dark light, like he's trying to establish himself among the greats of Chinese history and so forth. What is, just as a basic understanding, what is pleniums? Why is the sixth one important? And what does this lead into when they're talking about resolutions that are going to be passed?
Well, these are just gatherings of the top leaders every few years. So this is really it's important because it lays out kind of the China's plan for the next few years. I mean, like everybody is probably familiar with 5-year plans, right? Mm-hmm. So this is kind of like the 5-year plans, but more for like the overall planning of China's government, not just in the economic field, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No. I think I understand that. I mean, so it could be pretty much on any policy. It doesn't have to be purely economics. It could be military. It could be domestic, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. Yep. Exactly.
So when they're saying that it's going to be over the first 100 years of the Communist Party, what does that mean? I mean, I know what it means in the strictest sense, but what is the point of a resolution on the first 100 years of the Communist Party?
Well, I mean, this is really just a review of the history. I mean, what the party is doing is, continue to shore up its own legitimacy by presenting its own side of the history, right? Just like any other government in the world, and what this in this year we're coming up in a lot of important anniversaries. So, for example, 2021 is 100th anniversary of the Chinese Revolution in 1911, which overthrew the 1,000-year-old monarchy. That is usually the picture, I think, that's presented in the New York Times article that had 1911 to 2021, and it actually has hanging a portrait of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the leader of the Chinese Revolution in 1911, who is honored both on mainland China and Taiwan. And so a lot of this is just kind of a celebration of these anniversary dates. But at the same time, as you mentioned earlier, Xi Jinping is very popular. In fact, he has the Chinese Communist Party has garnered even more popularity in the last two and a half years because of its response to the COVID pandemic, especially after the Chinese public have witnessed what happened over in countries like United States, for example.
700,000 dead, yeah.
Yeah. So people are actually grateful that their government is taking effective measures to protect its populace, and that's what China do best, to mobilize resources in a crisis. So I mean, like, it's understandable. New York Times will always try to throw shade on anything.
Yes, it does. It looks for anything to throw shade, but at the very least, it had to own up to the fact that the guy is extremely popular. Are there any resolutions that are expected to come out of this outside of just the announcement of historical precedent? And, the New York Times tried to make it look as if it was revisionist history. Like, as if it was like, oh, he's trying to change the stuff around to give the best light. That's how it sounded like they were going with. But that's not really what's taking place, is it? Also, what are the typical resolutions that come out of these plenums?
These are, like I mentioned, they usually lay out the plans, the Chinese government plans for the next few years, and for. I mean, the New York Times article that we were discussing, basically they were speculating you will basically also officially announce the Xi Jinping's next term. That remained to be seen, but I mean, it's likely because right now Xi Jinping is doing a lot of things in China, especially in the last few years. So it's likely that he will stay on power beyond the first 2 terms to see it through. I mean, that's one of that's also one of the differences between China and say U.S. because we operate on election cycles, right? I mean, like everything is geared towards the next election, winning the next election. The Chinese leader can afford to devote energies toward more long-term planning because they didn't have to, bother with election campaigns and stuff like that.
Okay, that makes sense. I think I understand that. There's another issue that's popped up that I thought was really interesting. So Mark Milley, Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman, he made a point last week. He basically said we're witnessing one of the largest shifts in global geostrategic power the world has witnessed. And then he says, quote, they're clearly challenging us regionally, and their aspiration is to challenge the United States globally. Now, what he's talking about is basically China's military capability, military and economic capability that China is basically taking the world stage. And, some of the things that are referenced are the hypersonic missiles that China was able to basically let's say, nail down well before the United States was able to get involved in it. Russia was able to do it first. Also, the vehicle that basically went around the world hit its target. I mean, I think it was like 30 miles out of its target. But again, at a point where you had a hypersonic vehicle go around the world, the fact that it's anywhere close to its target is pretty phenomenal. Not to mention putting things on the moon or things in space, working in coordination with Russia in order to put satellites and whatnot either around the moon or Mars. I forget which one it is. But all of these things bespeak of high technological capabilities. And apparently our military is somewhat getting concerned, despite some of the comments that have been coming out of the Department of Defense saying, yes, we could undoubtedly defend Taiwan. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, I took this as, well, yeah, of course China is doing this with all the bellicosity being directed at it. It would be insane if it didn't take provisions to defend itself and to get across that it was willing to defend itself. Is there another way to look at this, though?
Oh, yeah, I don't think the PLA Navy is going to sell its fleet anytime into Gulf of Mexico. I mean, like the way the United States 7th Fleet is sailing into the South China Sea right now. So China, of course, China wants U.S. militarily out of East Asia. I mean, that posture has been consistent since the time of Korean War, and that's one of the reasons when China and U.S. on the opposite camp, both in the Korean War and during the Vietnam War, it was to push the U.S. military presence out of East Asia. And let's look back historically. Like South China Sea used to be basically American lake during the Vietnam War, because U.S. had bases both in South Vietnam and the Philippines at the time. You travel unimpededly throughout South China Sea, to the point that it creates a Gulf of Tonkin incident. Gulf of Tonkin is between Vietnam and North Vietnam and China. And now what the U.S. is really complaining about is that its once hegemony in East Asia is no longer assured with the rise of China. Like with we have talked about on your show before about the Chinese PLA aircraft flight over the Taiwan so-called ADIA zone, which was drawn up by United States in the 1950s, and that was specifically to challenge when U.S. sailed its armada into South China Sea. U.S. is still U.S. is still planning to stay involved militarily in East Asia, and that presence is increasingly challenged by the rise in China's military capability. But I don't think China is even interested to challenge U.S. say in places like Persian Gulf or North Atlantic. I mean, I don't see China, but definitely China is very interested to see U.S. military out of its own neighborhood, its own backyard. East China Sea, South China Sea for sure. And I think one of the common recurring thing we have talked about on your show is the heightened tension between China and U.S. is also very convenient for the U.S. military-industrial complex to continually demand and justify their trillion-dollar budget. And for China's supersonic missile, I don't think it's a game changer, because China has had a ballistic missile capability of striking continental United States since 1990s. And I mean, this is like the supersonic missile. Sure, that's just another tool in China's toolkit. It makes it harder for the U.S. ballistical missile defense system to counterattack, because current U.S. missile defense system is geared toward ballistic missiles, not supersonic missiles that circumnavigate the globe and can change its trajectory on a dime. But fundamentally, the mutual assured destruction balance still in place. I mean, China still maintain a credible second strike capability in a nuclear exchange. So I don't, and then also that's like I think that's, we can all agree that's a path that nobody wants to go down, actual nuclear exchange between these two superpowers. So I don't know how, I don't think the supersonic missile is really a game changer. More area where U.S. military was kind of caught by surprise, like, wow, we didn't know China had the capability.
It's also a show of technological acumen and the ability to get the research, the R&D done to make that happen when the U.S. hasn't.
Sure.
I think it's part of what which Jamarl was pointing at. Carl, thanks for being with us. There's another angle on this whole conversation that I wanted to go to for a second. Been thinking, it seems like we're in rabble-rousing for war mode, even if that's not going to actually get to war. It seems like, the DOD needs to find a way to make money, and so they're turning to China, and who knows what that will actually turn into. But I'm curious, on the other side of this, looking for some kind of resolution to this where America and China don't go to war, but instead work together on the world stage. This is a larger question, but Carl, culturally, not like in terms of the geopolitics, but I'm just curious, culturally, what would we, in a workable situation where we had sort of respect for each other, there was maybe a competitive edge to the relationship, but we weren't at each other's throats constantly. Again, in this sort of utopian scenario here, culturally, what would that look like? How do you think we would treat each other as nations? What would we think of each other? I mean, I can start briefly. It seems to me, at least right now, that a lot of Americans would recognize there's a bunch of discipline, and culturally from the bottom down, from the bottom all the way up to the top, in terms of the amount that Chinese people save, passing it forward to their kids. There are things like that. I'm just throwing that out as one kind of way that I could see Americans, okay, wow, the Chinese are doing cool things. And there's a way that we can respect them and operate on that level. I hope this makes sense, Carl, but I'm trying to look for some sort of resolution to this. And I'm curious, if we had a working relationship, what would that relationship look like, Carl?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't necessarily need to try to reach for utopia where we all holding hands, singing kumbaya. Yeah. But if we can go back to the U.S.-China relationship pre-2010s, I mean I think that would be a first major step, because at that time, at least all the U.S. president from Clinton to Obama were talking about strategic partnership rather than strategic competitor with China. There are actual very urgent and tangible goals both countries can work toward. For example, the global climate change. That actually requires cooperation between U.S. and China on many levels. So these are the things that I think the two sides could, if they decide to put aside the geopolitical competition, that things that they can actually, there's a lot of common ground to build upon. I think that is me being hopeful, of course.
Same, but optimistically, I hope that we can get to it. I just hope that it doesn't involve a war sometime in the intervening period, of course, which is what everybody's pointing to. We keep going back and forth on this one, Carl. The nuclear exchange thing. Right now, it seems like the U.S. obviously has the leading edge on the nuclear game, if it's permitted to use the term game, being as nuclear war is so morbid. But it seems like we have the edge. But you're saying, hopefully, we're not crazy enough to try to push that edge. But we've had other guests on the show come on and say, They think we are. They think they're truly unhinged people who would start to consider pushing the button, whatever Mark Milley protests about what Trump wouldn't do or whatever, what authority he has. The point is, when push comes to shove, maybe we just might get insane enough. The hotheads in the room might get hot enough. They might actually do it. Are you sort of decisive? You just don't see that happening, or are you hopeful that that's not going to happen, Carl?
I think it's both. I mean, this is not the first time that people in a U.S. administration threaten a nuclear war. I mean, even back in 1958, during the second Taiwan Strait crisis, the U.S. I think even as far back as the first Taiwan Strait crisis in 1954, the U.S. Administration under Eisenhower at the time, they actually announced that they had planned to use nuclear weapon against China. Yep. If China were to make a military grab for the offshore islands, we're not even talking about Taiwan. We're talking about the Taiwan government-controlled offshore islands of 1 mile offshore of mainland Chinese coast. If China made any kind of attempt to say amphibious landing on these small islands of Kinmen, 1 mile off the mainland Chinese coast, that U.S. would consider using nuclear weapons. So there's always some really crazy unhinged people in the administration, but I'm hoping the reason prevail at the end. The difference, though, back in 1950s, China didn't have a nuclear deterrent then. China exploded its first nuclear device in 1964. So today they do have, according to most estimate, about 300 nuclear warheads, and that's what China maintained for its minimal deterrent stockpile. Of course, U.S. have thousands, but that's not really the point. U.S. have the capability to destroy the Earth many times. But what's the point of that? China just maintains enough nuclear warheads that to maintain credible deterrence for say like a U.S. first strike scenario. So I don't see we are there yet. I'm sure there are unhinged people especially in the military establishment, but I think overall there is enough clear heads, at least in the civilian government at this point, to put a stop to that.
Fingers crossed, from your mouth to God's ears, because sometimes it doesn't necessarily seem that way. I mean, Daniel Ellsberg mentioned that, saying in the 60s that the United States government was willing to use nuclear weapons in order to defend Taiwan. But you make an exceptional point. That was when there was no parity, meaning, China didn't necessarily have the capabilities of attacking the United States. The United States had the capability of attacking China with weapons like that. One other thing I wanted to get into, energy demands. So right now, Eurasia, I guess you can say parts of Europe, are basically suffering all sorts of an energy crisis, with Russia giving out gas, well, not giving out, but selling gas to many of the places, China included, meaning increasing the supplies. What caused that energy crisis in China, and how did it have any kind of effects on, I guess, the items that China is producing or shipping in general?
Well, Europe has its very own specific circumstances because you relies a large amount of its natural gas from the Russian supply to keep Europe warm during the winter, and at the same time, natural gas is also a lot cleaner than coal, and also in terms of carbon emissions. And that is why also China is increasingly switching to natural gas fired power plants, because China has its own climate change policy goals to reach carbon neutral by 2060. And one way they're trying to do that is to switch, the over reliance on coal as a source of fossil fuel and power, and that's why they're building they're working with Russia to build a new gas pipeline from Siberia, the Siberian Power Line number 2, that will supply the additional Russian gas to China. I think China has its own I don't think China necessarily China does coordinate with Russia in many ways, but in terms of say Russian energy policy vis-a-vis Europe, I don't see China is necessarily involved. That China is more involved in trying to acquire and secure its own energy supplies from places including Russia.
That makes perfect sense. I wanted to go back. There's a cultural angle here, and it kind of comes back to the conversation. I was in the bathroom at the time, but you guys were talking about the Sixth Plenum and allegations the New York Times made of rewriting history, whatever. And I heard your bits on that. But there's one event that comes to mind particularly, or one figure. 1911, the 1911 reform, revolution, liberalization, whatever, modernization of China as it's painted on the Western side. A major figure in that, from the American perspective, at least, I don't know how major he actually was. Homer Lee, as a sort of little-known American adventurer, author, and geopolitical strategist, literally how he's represented on Wikipedia if you choose to look him up. Anyway, he played a part in that, basically supporting the 1911 Chinese Republican Revolution. It's that kind of thing. If we were able to rewrite our relationship, and I'm speaking about America, we were able to rewrite a relationship with the Chinese in the hopes that they might be willing to do the same thing with us, where it's like, wow, we kind of have some mutual history and potentially a mutual destiny or something like that. Again, I don't want to be too utopian, and there's always going to be a competitive edge. But even the AUKUS deal, I guess, circling around it a little bit, it was the UK, it was the United Kingdom, the Great Britain, the British Empire that did the whole Hong Kong seizure opium war thing. It wasn't the Americans. And I guess looking forward, I'm trying to figure out what the common ground might be, and I'm grasping at it. Carl, I hope this makes sense. What's your take?
I mean, actually, there are plenty of period of cooperation in the past that both sides could draw inspiration from, and particularly during World War II. United States was China's ally in the war, and I remember growing up in 1980s China. That was a brief kind of honeymoon period between U.S. and China after the Nixon visit. And during that time, that's when I started learning about like the Flying Tigers. These are the American pilots who came to China first as volunteers to help safeguarding the skies of Chinese cities from the Japanese bombing. And then later, they flew supplies to China over the Himalayan hump. So these are still the Flying Tigers has a legacy in China that's still very much, the memory is still very much cherished and treasured. I went to a World War II museum in far southwest Yunnan, near the border with Myanmar. They had a World War II museum there. I went in. They have a whole entire exhibit devoting to the Flying Tigers and the Americans that came to help China during World War II. I think there are many instances in history that I think those when two sides were on the same side. And I think if we ever go back to that, the 1980 level of almost friendship-like status between U.S. and China, those periods will probably be reemphasized. I imagine.
I would hope so. Under Deng Xiaoping, big era there. Jamarl, you were coming in.
Yeah, I think the difficulty with that is the competition issue. Like, as long as, a perfect example, when Bernie Sanders was running against Hillary Clinton, as long as Hillary Clinton believed that Sanders wasn't an option, wasn't a contest, etc., they were close friends. They were buddy-buddy. The moment that they became competition, at that point, things soured. And it seems like that's the relationship between the United States and China at this point. The United States consider China an existential threat. And because of that, competition almost just kind of springs out of it. I mean, what would be a pathway, just from your take on this and just from your historical reference, what would be a pathway to try to get around that? And is there even a pathway to get around it?
Well, let's keep in mind right now the U.S.-China relationship. The U.S. has been the primary driver in the latest downturn spiral. So all you really takes is a change of mindset on the U.S. leadership, right, to come to terms with China, because China still very much want to maintain a cordial and friendly relations with U.S. I mean, unlike the unlike much of the national security establishment on U.S. that sees China's existential threat to the U.S. hegemony, China still sees a lot of benefit to cooperate.
Carl, we're going to have to end this here, and I totally understand your point. Thank you very much. The voice you listen to is Carl Jha, host of Silk and Steel podcasts on China and surrounding areas. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And that would mean you are listening, more likely than not, to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Shout out to Carl Jha. Always enjoy those conversations. He's very knowledgeable of it, and he's there, so he kind of has this on-the-ground explanation of that stuff.
Yeah.
But like I said, we want to hit a few topics on that. We'll come back to it after headlines. In the news, let's get to the headlines. Yesterday in the United States, there were 22,085 new COVID cases reported, along with 132 deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 76,436 cases, per day. A total of 36 cases per day, which is effectively no change from the average 2 weeks ago. 58% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 67% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 46,449,331 people across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 754,051 men, women, and children in the United States. Keep in mind, the numbers, I keep saying this every Monday, for whatever reason, the reporting is always low. So 22,085 as compared to the average of 72,000 and 132 deaths in compared to, I believe, when we left on Friday, it was 1,600, something to that effect. Just be aware, tomorrow the number will be back up to normal, unfortunately. The Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that researchers are investigating a link between COVID-19 vaccines and myocarditis. The CDC has listed on its website an incidence of myocarditis, along with some usually receiving their second vaccination, particularly among adolescents and young males, and usually of mild cases that quickly resolve. The CDC recommends that anyone who gets symptoms visit the hospital. The symptoms include chest pain, shortness of breath, and a feeling of a fast or fluttering heartbeat. In national news, on Friday, the House passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework Bill without passing the Build Back Better spending plan, the contents of which have been the subject of months-long competition between progressives and centrist Democrats. No schedule has been set for the voting on the later bill. I think they're trying to expect it within a week or so when Congress comes back, but at this point, we're waiting on the Congressional Budget Office for their scoring. The right-wing Democrats basically said they'll vote on the bill at the point where the scoring comes back, and they gave this kind of basically a promise to do so, providing it comes back as basically a wash. But we'll see. Who knows? This stuff, basically, the bill has been sidelined for the time being. The FBI raided the home of James O'Keefe on Saturday after raiding the homes of two Project Veritas associates last week. Project Veritas is a controversial media organization that works with informants and publishes private interactions with left-leaning organizations. The FBI is investigating Ashley Biden's diary, which apparently these guys had access to. Veritas is a shady organization. I got to be honest, I don't put any kind of legitimacy to pretty much anything they do. By the same token, the issue surrounding this is a little weird. How did they get the diary? Why is the Secret Service, or why are these guys, or why is the FBI basically raiding the home of these guys over the diary, et cetera, et cetera? There's a lot of questions around this.
One big thing there that I like thinking back, I don't think I made clear. The reason that James O'Keefe didn't want to publish the information, as far as I can tell from all the public reporting, is that the diary was originally stolen. So it's a stolen diary.
No, you mentioned it.
Oh, did I mention that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But the thing is, though, I mean, just because something is stolen, that doesn't, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on this, but media is almost defended or shielded from producing information, even if it's from a source. Like when the DNC, for example, was hit. Well, the media could still publish the evidence of Hillary Clinton's, email list, or Hillary Clinton's, the slush fund. There was a Clinton Foundation. Like, they still were allowed to do that stuff. But again, I don't know. I don't know if there's something else going on around this that is making this kind of weirder. Because all things being equal, I would have thought he would have published it. But we'll see.
Yeah.
Rappers Travis Scott and Drake are being sued by after 8 people died and dozens others were injured during a stampede at the overcrowded Travis Scott concert. Travis Scott continued to perform during the stampede as medical professionals arrived on the scene. What was the name of this? There was a specific name to this, right?
Let me go back and look at the name of the event you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, because
it was Astro World.
That's it, Astro World. Yeah, and apparently Shane mentioned earlier today that apparently people were calling it devil worship or something to that effect.
Yeah, it was like I'm pretty sure it was right-wing Twitter. And I don't want to make it into too big of a deal. It was mostly an aside that I brought up just to be like palm to the head kind of thing, Sad to see. But
Very weird stuff.
There you go.
So the Supreme Court will be hearing the case today about the government's ability to get lawsuits thrown out of court by claiming they would reveal secrets threatening to national security. The case involves a group of Muslim men from South Carolina who fled a class action lawsuit claiming the FBI spied on them and hundreds of others following the September 11 attacks. They claimed religious discrimination. The case was dismissed by a lower court due to the government saying if it went forward, it would reveal, quote, states' secrets, unquote. That's astonishing, right? I mean, that is a big case. And that's not just for the Muslim thing. That's going to expand all throughout kind of the intelligence state. Even, believe it or not, on the UAP topic. I mean, if the state or the government can basically say, oh, we can't reveal this because of state secrets, how do you know that they're telling the truth? And whether they were telling the truth or not, aren't there some things that supersede this kind of need for the state to basically keep its privacy? I don't know. At a certain point, the state secret thing is just used as a dodge so they don't necessarily have to reveal things that are embarrassing to the government. That's a fascinating case, though. I'm very curious on that one. In international news, this morning, former American President Barack Obama will address the COP26 Climate Change Conference, which has been ongoing for a week. The event will close out this Friday. I'm hoping to get Paul Beckwith back on Friday. I've sent him a copy asking him to come back on at the close of the meeting, just to get an idea on, was anything accomplished, all of these world leaders coming together, what's the result of this? We'll see. In sports, on Friday, while appearing on the Pat McAfee show, Rogers said that he was in the crosshairs of the woke mob right now over his vaccination status and that the media was on a witch hunt to find out which players were vaccinated. He previously announced back in August that he was immunized, but turns out he's unvaccinated and has been following protocols as if he was vaccinated. And of course, this has all sorts of problems because, again, in the league, if you are ill from COVID or something, they penalize the team. They're not necessarily allowing people to take off for COVID stuff. In business news, Tesla CEO Elon Musk said he would sell 10% of his Tesla stock on Saturday after 57% of Twitter users voted yes in a poll posted this weekend. Quote, I was prepared to accept their either outcome, unquote, Musk said after the voting ended.
Think about that for a second, Jamarl.
Yeah, he put it on Twitter.
Tens of billions of dollars on the line. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars in terms of the value of the stock.
Yeah.
10% of his ownership of Tesla stock, and he's the primary owner of Tesla stock. That's a lot of money, and he basically put that up for the public to decide on. It's just a weird thing. Elon Musk, whose official name right now, by the way, on Twitter, his handle is still twitter.com/Elon Musk, but if you actually go to his account and you look at his name, it is Lord Edge with an E at the end of the word Lord. It's just a weird guy. Anyway, the tweet reads, much is made lately of unrealized gains being a means of tax avoidance, so I propose selling 10% of my Tesla stock. Do you support this? Just a simple yes/no poll. Right now, it's 57. Final results, not even right now. Final results are 57.9% yes, 42%, 42.1% no. And I was having a little bit of trouble finding the exact amount, meaning his gain on the shares totals just under 28 billion. I just found it, 28 billion US dollars. A lot of money, and it's a lot of money in taxes all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if this is legit, but what I saw was that's enough money to fund the U.S. federal government for 7 hours, and I'm not making that up. That is not fake news. That's what I saw. Who knows if it's fake news?
That actually could be true, by the way, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that just means he has too much money on his hands. I mean, we could just make a frivolous, oh yeah, I'm just going to let the public decide on what I should do with this. Okay, $20 billion, I'll just put it in my pocket. Thanks, God.
But is anybody else doing this?
Nobody. Who else has money to do this?
A lot of other people. A lot of other multi-billionaires. I mean, I could look down the the net worth list around the world.
He's the richest person on the planet, right?
I thought he was second behind Jeff Bezos.
It's either him or Bezos, right?
I think he's back behind Bezos.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's not rich. I'm saying literally, who else? I'm not even saying it's a magnanimous move. It might be. I'm saying it's a weird one. Who else does this? That's what I'm saying.
I guess my point is not many people could. I mean, you're talking about like less than 0.001% or something like that.
And I'm saying of those people, isn't that the criteria you should use judging the elites? Of the elites, who's acting in what way? You know what I mean? Not okay because you're elite. Blah blah blah. I mean that's valid in its own way too.
That's what it is.
Yeah, it's true. But I'm saying isn't the point of judging the elites not just that they have power, which is okay, you can make the argument, but also how they use the power. In other words, if somebody's powerful, if they become powerful, and then they do a lot of good things with that power, I think very few people by and large complain about that.
Yeah.
So it's like the point of judging these people is, okay, he's doing this. Is it a good thing? I don't know. It's a weird thing, certainly. Anyway.
Well, he's $20 billion richer. So how much of his stock does he have left? What's his thing? Because he's the overwhelming majority share
of
Tesla.
If I do the quick math and 10% is 28 billion, then that means 100% would be 280 billion. So $280 billion.
Yeah, but I don't know if he owns all of it himself.
Well, I think that's 10% of his stock.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's selling 10% of his Tesla stock. So his ownership is equivalent to about 280 billion, just based on that math. I don't know how much of Tesla stock he owns.
Yeah.
I don't know that off the top of my head.
All right, in holiday news, we have National Dunce Day. I didn't know dunce days. National Harvey Wallbanger Day. I'm not quite sure what Harvey Wallbanger is.
And also, I was just swapping these in. National Parents is Teachers Day. And then STEM/STEAM Day.
What is STEM? Oh, STEM.
Exactly.
Like school.
Science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and then STEAM throws in art, I think it is.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So back to what Carl Jha was saying real quick. Look, it's easy to say that, hey, if the person changes their mind, then things could be better. Well, that's almost always the case. But the issue becomes the environmental factors that push the public's or push the opinion of whatever institution we're talking about. And in this case, we're talking about the U.S. government. The U.S. government is perfectly fine with China if it believes that China is going to remain second fiddle, if they don't believe that there's kind of this militaristic or economic competition. But the moment that comes to fruition and the United States believes that there's a capability of China overtaking it, all bets are off. And at that point, you get friction, you get this kind of competition. You get the U.S. going with this notion that it's an existential crisis for China to be able to take economic or militaristic domination. Over China to be able to overtake the U.S. militarily or economically, in which case it kind of breeds competition. I'm not quite sure how to get around that. I mean, especially with the kind of prevailing modus operandi that the United States runs with. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you for coming back to this, Jamarl. My optimistic note, and we didn't have time for it at the end of the last hour, is just, okay, there's game theory, there's logic, but there are different kinds of logic, and you can change your logic over time. And just because we're following one game theoretic model, that's a habit, that's a mental habit that people in the American government are following. I'll put it like this. I'll give you a metaphor for a second. We're in a room. We're trapped in a room. Our Earth is a room. And there are mostly some very, very large people in that room. You got big, big, big players that are crowding each other out. And every square inch practically of that room is filled up with people.
Overweight?
Maybe overweight, however you want to look at it, or just really muscular. Okay. Probably some combination, and maybe they vary. You got the U.S., China, Russia, the EU as a block, and it has some weird internal problems that cause it to drift in different directions. But you get my point. And then you have all these smaller countries. And the size of the large players in that room is larger, as far as I can tell, compared to all the rest of the players than at pretty much any other point in history. We have these major nations, just a few blocks, basically. Yeah. I guess you had the Soviet Union and the U.S. My point being, maybe there's a time for us to learn and realize that the logic that applied when you had all these different players in the room doesn't apply so well when you only have a few, and that you need to actually work with them and not militarily, or else you face nuclear catastrophe. It's the hope that, you know, the whole nuclear generation of people who are like, wow, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, what if the whole world was like that? Looking at our program, thinking, what can we just learn from this? Maybe now that we finally face another serious threat, we actually are going to learn. And that's the hope. And I'm not saying that we should lean on that, because it might not happen and we all might suffer some terrible fates. But my point is, you know, game theory is one thing, but maybe we'll actually learn. It's a possibility. That's the thing. There's something, like, I get your sort of pushback might be, but the game theory, I mean, Shane, the logic there, how do you get around that? Yeah. And I hear you on that. My take is there's another kind of logic too. Culture's a factor, and historically, people have been, quote unquote, irrational. People have been kind to each other, even on the national level, in ways they might not have needed to, in ways you wouldn't have expected. And the hope is that maybe we can make that happen. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but my point is it doesn't need to come down to the wire of, oh, it's inevitable. We are going to kick this off because of game theory. There are other logics too. That's my point.
I would agree with that if something happened, like something just drastic, like where planet gets hit with an asteroid, or, you know, aliens make contact, or some kind of natural calamity or something that people can put that stuff to the side and they can just kind of focus on this kind of human connection. But I have a hard time seeing, like, I don't know what that looks like in normal practice. Like, as for example, does the United States at some point say, okay, fair enough, China has 1.3 billion people. They're going to pass us technologically and militarily, and we're okay with that. It's that part that I can't see around. It seems like the people who you have in office now are just raw hawks. I mean, they're putting weapon systems, crowding Russia at this point. They're putting weapon systems in Europe to get closer. I mean, I just saw the article the other day looking for artillery. I mean, this stuff is pretty, like, extreme in the level of brinksmanship that they're willing to use. It's as if they don't believe that a war could come about.
Here's where I fall on this one. It kind of reminds me of the conversation we were having with Guy McPherson about climate change, where it's like he's talking about hope, and he's, you know, Guy McPherson, for people who didn't hear the interview, believes that humanity is doomed functionally. He believes that climate change is going to knock us out. He's like, his take is hope is misplaced. Hope is a distraction. If you have hope, you're just damning yourself because you've given in to this idea that you can, you know, it's somehow it's all going to work out and you're not actually having to do anything about it. And so it's this sort of self-fulfilling anti-prophecy where your hope dooms you. And I don't want to make the same mistake with this. I hear his argument. I don't know if I fully buy it, but I get it. Yeah. But at the same time, if you believe that everything is doomed, well, that kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy too. And so if the truth is somewhere in between hope and doom, you know, we might live, we might die. How do we do it? I don't know. The truth is somewhere there. But my point is, I want to establish it's not inevitable. There are other things, and whether it's an alien invasion or a meteor drift or climate change, or we just realize, hey, we don't need to constantly fight each other with arms. We can fight each other with money or culture or art or something like that. Maybe we can learn from it. My point is, I don't know that's going to happen, but it could. And maybe we should make it a priority.
Well, clearly, I would prefer it be, you know, not this kind of armed conflict stuff.
Yeah.
Self-fulfilling, you know, it's hard to get around. It's self-fulfilling could very well just be the factors that, you know, if we're playing chess and there's this 20-move continuation, well, kind of it was, you know, forced on some level. And no, this doesn't have to be forced because human beings can make a different choice. And maybe I just don't see it not getting down to a wire where that choice is made at the wire.
I hear you.
And, you know, that's unfortunate. I mean, I totally agree with you in the sense that it would be great if that stuff can change. Because if you think about it, the world could be different, fundamentally so, especially if the countries that are just kind of continuous bellicosity say, you know what, why don't we just work together on some of these problems?
It's true. We got to get this corrupt leadership class out of Washington politics. We need to really, really heal Washington, make it more functional. Left, right, a mix, whatever that looks like, we got to get the hawks out.
Yeah, agreed.
We got to close this segment out, folks. We're going to be coming back in a minute, speaking with Garland Nixon, talking about the BIF bill, the Build Back Better plan, infrastructure getting passed on Friday, and what that means for the now marooned the now marooned spending package. Progressives and centrists have been fighting over this. We'll also be talking about what this means for Biden's presidency. Also going to be hitting last week's, Virginia election results, Democrats bottoming out in rural America, really. The sort of media shift, narrative shift. Okay, Biden's presidency isn't doing so well. We're going to be having that conversation with Garland when we come back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back on the other side of this short break.
lines.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area or find yourself in the D.C. area, you can always catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Well, celebration and all that good stuff. Biden has finally got his infrastructure bill over the finish line. And this is the bipartisan infrastructure bill, of course, the $1 trillion bill. This is basically nuts, bolts, roads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he is basically claiming this is a win. It's unclear when he's going to sign this, but it's probably going to be sooner rather than later, since he blew off his vacation that was coming up in order to stay in D.C. The next question, or the thing that supposed to went along with this, was the reconciliation bill, the Build Back Better plan, or the Build Back Better Act. That was the thing that progressives have basically said, we're not passing the infrastructure bill until we pass the BBB, with the thought that moderates and right-wing Democrats really wanted the infrastructure to pass. But if you decouple the two, they may kill or gut the reconciliation. Well, the reconciliation was gutted even before they passed the other one, and that's down to $1.7 trillion. But the Congressional Progressive Caucus basically gave over the votes necessary in order to pass it, with this kind of promise that after CBO scoring, that the right-wing Democrats will go through with passing that agenda. To have a conversation about this and whether or not it is even going to matter at this point. The election has taken place in Virginia, in New Jersey. There was the Democrat barely won. And what does this mean going forward? Is this a new breath of fresh air, or is Biden and the Democrats basically stuck with the point of view that was cast over the last several months? To have a conversation about it, we're joined with Garland Nixon. He's a Sputnik political analyst and co-host of the Critical Hour and Critical Hour Extended, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard right here on Radio Sputnik. Garland, my man, what's going on?
Thanks a lot for inviting me today, guys.
No, absolutely. Garland, I'm going to ask you a pop quiz question. Joe Biden's approval rating right now is 38%, with a disapproval rating of 59%. This just came out. This was the Suffolk USA Today poll. What is Kamala Harris's approval rating right now?
I'm going to guess somewhere between 0 and 1.
Close.
Effectively. That's what it's so low. It's effectively nil.
28%. 28%. Like, she's like 10 points less than the president on this, and it kind of makes sense as to why she's basically not part of this process. I'm curious, what do you think about the Build Back Better thing and the infrastructure package? Meaning, after 4 or 5 months of progressives saying we're not going to pass it unless they go together, and then after Virginia, I guess it focuses the mind on some level, this level of failure. Well, then they turn around and pass it without the reconciliation bill being passed, basically sidelining the Build Back Better plan. What are your thoughts about how this process has turned out and the results of this process in general from the standpoint of national perception of this party?
Well, Here's what I think. I think it is a very important moment ideologically for this reason. The Democratic Party had been pretending as though they were accepting of the left flank of their party. I don't know if progressive is the right term, but the left flank of their party. And they had, there was discussion of how much power they had, the Jimmy Dore discussion of should they hold back their votes until they get what they want, and they have a lot of power in the party, et cetera, et cetera. So what happened Friday? Nancy Pelosi enlisted the GOP. They got 13 Republican votes to pass this. So what does that mean? How many people in the Progressive Caucus? Well, it certainly appears to me that what the signal here is that the left flank of the Democratic Party is completely defanged. They have no power whatsoever. The Democratic Party simply signaled, look, we are the right wing of the Democratic Party, and we can align with people in the Republican Party to pass corporate-friendly legislation. We don't need if the left flank peels off, we'll just get a bunch of Republicans because we're more aligned with them anyway when it comes to corporate-friendly legislation. So now they leave the left flank of the party reeling, recognizing that they're powerless. And how do the people outside of the party react? How are all these people that have been calling for them to, to exercise their power react now that it's obvious they have none in the party? They're done. It's over. It's up to them how they deal with it.
So what do they pivot to, Garland? We've been going back and forth on this one. Speaking with Ted Rall last week, he said, as always, voters are going to be thinking about what's affecting their pocketbooks. The price of housing, the price of healthcare, inflation, things like that, wages, things like that. But Democrats have been focusing on Trump pretty consistently. This last time, if everything is as it seems, it worked for them. You know what I mean? They got it in 2020. Granted, that was after COVID started, and Trump was certainly in a ditch with that, having to deal with the optics of presiding over the rise of this stuff anyway. That worked in 2020, but you think they'll try it again in 2022, 2024? Do you think it'll work again then if they do try it again? Garland, what's your take?
I would start by arguing that it didn't work in 2020. If you look at what was going on during the pandemic, they should have, whitewashed, as we would say in various games. They should have crushed the Republicans. They eked into the presidency, right? They lost House. They lost the House, seats in the House. They, actually, when the numbers are counted in the Senate, they actually got less overall votes than the GOP. They lost in the states. So the reality was that Joe Biden's barely, scraping out a victory was an anomaly. So my argument is, no, they didn't. It didn't work for them at all. They just beat Trump because barely beat Trump because of the circumstances. And this is a continuous slide because they are devoid of policy chops. Because, as an example, regardless of what anybody thinks of policy, 88% of Democrats are in favor of Medicare for all, and they'll never get a vote on it because it's the other 12% who run the party. So they have run afoul of their actual voting base, and it has become obvious that the base of the Democratic Party is their oligarchical overlords. So you have now a party that is detached from its electorate. And they can only continue to go in one direction. There's been recent polls that shows that young people who voted for Democrats are gone in the other direction. Independents gone in the other direction. So I'm saying they're continuing the downward slide.
Well, and one take on this, the good faith take is that they're naive. They didn't realize with the 2020 thing. I sort of hear your comeback because admittedly, it's true they were weak, but they still won. But I get the ambiguity there. My thing on that though is, their explanation for the weakness, their explanation for the weak turnout is effectively, as far as I can tell, that Americans are bigoted and that people went for Trump because of it, right? And that's the sort of thing. And of course, we saw echoes of that in January 6th and the way the media and politicians have treated it since then. The increasingly wide net the investigation is thrown as it tries to get whatever it can out of the woodworks, whatever it can entrap in American society. The point is, they didn't learn their lesson back then. And that's the good faith take. The bad faith take is, they're just doing this because they have no other ideas. They have no wiggle room between their donor class and what they can provide for the public. That's the bad faith take, that they realize that it's foolish and they're just doing the whole, a lot of the arguments they're making, the sort of culture war arguments, I think you get where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, the good faith take, which I think I genuinely lean towards, I don't see how they get out of that. If they've convinced themselves that America culturally is just on the other side of the bench, is too far gone, it's beyond the pale, and now we need to hector them and lecture them and change them in all these different ways, if that's their tone, I don't think that's going to work. But I don't see how they're going to wise up, because it seems like that's the idea in the Democratic Party across the board. What do you think, Garland?
Well, I'll take some of that and add a little bit more. I think that the real problem the Democratic Party has lies in my first comment. Okay, if 88% of your party, if you look at the Build Back Better social programs, right? Not only do Democrats approve of it in increasing benefits for Medicare, giving vision and hearing and dental for seniors. 72% of Americans are in favor of that. Most people feel like, somebody's 80 years old, we need to give them some dentures and, and hearing aid. Okay. So what happens? The Democratic Party is in a position where their actual policies are at odds with their base and with most Americans. So they're in a position where their agenda must be hidden. They are not in a position to say, we're opposing the things that our base likes. So they have to come up with another option. They don't have another choice there. So that's why I said it's a combination of the things. They can't come out and say, we oppose the things that our base and most Americans like. So they have to come up with something else. And just like the Republicans did for years with you could use the Southern strategy, et cetera. When we can't tell you that we're really here for our corporate donors, we got to come up with something. And so they're pushed into a corner where they have to come up with something. And that something is not, it isn't. I'll put it like this, like you were saying before, people vote their pocketbooks. So now your social issues, your woke issues, things like that, people are like, okay, yeah, I hear you, but I can't pay my bills. And that's the position they're in now. And they still can't come out tomorrow and say, oh, yeah, the best part of the infrastructure bill was asset recycling, where we can sell off your water and your roads and everything to the corporations, to Goldman Sachs and Citibank. And now you're going to pay a fortune to drive down the road because you're going to have to pay tolls. Now your water bill is going to go up 10 times. They can't 10 times what it was before. They can't come out and say that was in the infrastructure bill.
No, you
so
can't
they got to say something else.
Yeah, you can't say that. And more importantly, to your credit, the overwhelming majority of the public is for either Medicare for all or at the very least expansion of health care. I mean, the Morning Consult in the polling, that was the most popular provision in the bill. And that is decidedly the thing that they took out the bill. It's like during COVID crisis with 750,000 people dying from a medical issue, they take out the medical part from the bill itself. Astonishing stuff. That they were willing to do for stuff like this. Do you think that this is going to have, the fact that they passed this, is going to have any kind of greater effect? Or is the point of view already ensconced at this point? I remember, for example, when Obama was running against Mitt Romney, Obama spent a lot of money early on in order to define Mitt Romney as being an elitist, out of touch, this kind of Scrooge McDuck-esque figure. And so, it was somewhat of a risk or somewhat of a gamble, but the thought was, if we can define who he is, anything that comes out of it is going to be shaped by the previous definition of who he is. On some level, I get this impression that Democrats are kind of there. Like, over the last, 4 or 5 months, that the impression from the public itself is almost like baked into it. And I don't necessarily think passing one bill, just one, is going to change that. Even if they were able to get the reconciliation bill passed at some point, it feels like the opinion of the public or Democrats is set going into the midterms, and for that matter, Joe Biden's presidency. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I don't think it's going to do them any good. I mean, some wonky infrastructure bill that, most Americans don't even know what's in it and don't really care. They're like, yeah, they passed an infrastructure bill now. Why can't I find this stuff why can't I find what I want on the shelves? Why am I paying $10 a pound for literally $10 a pound for bacon? No, that I don't think it does them any good. It's once again, it's the Democrats who are playing, if Anderson Cooper and Rachel Maddow were the only two people voting, they'd win unanimously. But that's who they play to now. They play to the representation of their base, right? The most obvious representation in America of the oligarchs, like the head of the oligarchs sticking its head out of the bubble, is the Rachel Maddows and the Anderson Coopers. That's very appropriate because his mother, Anderson Cooper's mother's Gloria Vanderbilt. So yeah, there'll be celebration, there'll be happiness on the sets of MSNBC and CNN. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth in the hills of Appalachia. Well, people realize I can't afford to buy a pound of bacon.
These are the gargoyles affixed outside the church of the Democratic establishment. No, I hear you on this stuff. I hear you on this stuff completely, Garland. And I don't know what they're gonna do with it. They're not gonna learn their lessons. Now, Republicans seem to be making a comeback. Jamarl, just last week, of course, as Virginia race, before it happened or after it happened, I forget the exact timing. You brought up these numbers. Basically, Republican leads on Democrats on all these issues. Basically, to get the idea across, Americans think Republicans can get things done, or at least they don't think
like 18
Biden.
points.
Yeah.
It was like the economy. It was a comparison between Democrats and Republicans from the standpoint of American perspective on a host of issues. So, but on the economy, I think it was like 20-something points. On border security, it was like 20-something points. On getting things done, I think it was like 15 points. Like, it was a list of provisions that were big ticket issues. It wasn't, they might say, do you think Democrats would do better on COVID? Okay, they'll win that. But from the standpoint of a list of things and the way the public was looking, this last 5 months have not done Democrats well at all on this stuff. Shane.
Well, it's 28% you gave for Kamala. I think it was 38% for Biden.
Yeah.
And Jack posted on the back end, marijuana legalization is polled at 66% approval rating nationwide right now. That is as high as Biden's and Kamala's approval rating combined.
And by the way,
you
that
had
was something
28 to
Biden said
38.
he was going to do also.
Yes,
and
it was.
didn't do.
And hasn't done. Garland, I know that one's close to your heart. What's your take on that?
Well, let me make a broad statement about this. I think one of the things that happens in in America, because, there's not a lot. When it comes to corporate issues, when it comes to the Pentagon and things like that, the Democrats and the Republicans are aligned. Thusly, Nancy Pelosi can grab those 15 votes from Republicans anytime she wants. But what happens is it's kind of the angel or devil effect. When one party starts looking like a devil, the other one starts looking like an angel. Mm-hmm. So you could take a bunch of polls and say which one is better. And this, you could say, if we were stuck in the Donner Pass and we had to eat either Republicans or Democrats, which one would be, taste better and be less filling? And people would go, Republicans by 12%, because right now the Republicans are they have the halo over their head because the Democrats look so bad. One of the things that happens is this, and this is the cycle we're in. The Democrats are in, they screw everything up. The Republicans say, put us in and we'll fix them. The Republicans go back in, they screw everything up because it's a systemic problem. Yeah. And both of them are part of the system that creates this dysfunction. So then the other party comes in for 4 to 8 years and they botch everything up. These two parties know. They already know the game that, yes, I can botch things up for 4 to 8 years. I can go to some think tank. I can go to Wall Street. I can get paid for 4 to 8 years while I wait my turn. The other side botches it up, and I'll get back in by proxy. It doesn't matter. That's the other part of the revolving door that people don't talk about. And the Americans, like suckers, just wait. And you know what? 4 to 8 years from now, when the Republicans are back in power, there'll be polls and they'll all be reversed. Yes, sirree, the polls say the Democrats will be better on this, and this. And we'll just keep going around on that cycle until it slams into a brick wall, which it's apparently doing right now.
And whenever that happens, I think you're probably right. We'll get another generation of disaffected people who switched over to Republicans because they thought, hey, maybe we'll see some actual progress here. Plenty of people I'm talking about pivoting from, often left-leaning, even within the context of the Democratic Party, broadly for things like universal health care. I can think of a couple people who fit the bill, basically, who are like, I don't really like a lot of things Democrats are doing, who start to side with Republicans. But when Republicans are in power, are they actually going to use that power to get what these people want? Or is it just going to be another sweep of the cycle or whatever, where you get more disaffected? I don't know. Garland, going into the break before we brought you in, I got animated for a second. I was like, we really need to get these politicians out of Congress and have a genuine reform of the political system, left, right, whatever. I don't care. These people could get us all killed. Just coming back to that conversation, as it's healthy to do every once in a while, what do you think would be a good way to do that broadly?
Well, now I wish I could. Everybody's looking around and saying, what's the answer? Because, as you said, and this is what's important, when people say, vote them all out, what they're saying is the problem is the people. If the problem was the people on Capitol Hill, when you replaced the people, things would be fine. If you remember 2010, all of these Tea Party members came in and they're like, hey, we're going in here and we're going to change Capitol Hill. No, Capitol Hill changed them. And a bunch of the Tea Party people became just the same old swamp monsters. AOC comes in. I'm standing up to fight for the little guy. Yeah, she's running around in a $50,000 dress or something, or $12,000 dress that says tax the rich on it. How ironic is that? The bottom line is this. Until Americans recognize that the system is the issue and begin to look for ways to disrupt the system, all they're going to get is, of various varieties of the same system. And so, yeah, we can vote them all out. We can change them. But you know what's going to happen when the new members of Congress come in? There's going to be lobbyists lined up waiting for the new suckers, rubbing their hands together with checks and with all kind of perks and with all kinds of women or men or whatever it is they want to offer them. All the things they want will be there. So, yeah, it's systemic until we wake up to the fact that the system is the problem. We'll just replace, the parts on the same broken system.
Yeah, the system is the sickness on that point. I totally agree with you on that one. And it seems the public is looking for something, but it doesn't necessarily know where to go. Like, it seems that it slashes back and forth. I mean, if you remember, Obama had a supermajority in Congress. He ends up losing it all to Republicans, to which they basically take all of Congress and the presidency. Democrats are just now on their time frame where they're able to take it all back. It seems that the American public just doesn't know where to go with it. It's like, yes, I would prefer to have Medicare for all, but there is nobody who I can vote for credibly to even, put it out there for me to even try to get a vote on that particular issue. And I think this is a host of issues where they're stuck with on that front. One of the other provisions of things that came up was the rural Virginia or rural votes. And this was specific to Virginia, at least for the last election. And the thought was, okay, well, at least we've bottomed out in the number of votes we're losing from rural America. And come to find out, that wasn't true. So this was last week. Biden's lost rural Virginia by 6 points last year when he ran in the race. McAuliffe lost it by 27 points. 27 points. So, some of the stuff, yes, it might go to the education system, especially the things in the books that were in with McAuliffe basically saying parents shouldn't have any kind of responsibility or any kind of right to delineate what goes on in regards to the education for kids. And I think I somewhat agree with that, not full-throatedly, and especially not on the topic to which they're talking about. How are they losing the rural vote this bad? I mean, does it really boil down to the culture issues, or is there something deeper in the reason why they're losing to this level? I mean, Biden won Virginia by 10 points, and then you end up losing it like a year later. And even from this standpoint, where you get 6 points losing the rural vote, and then all of a sudden 27 points, McAuliffe loses it. What's giving? Why are they losing the rural vote to this degree?
Well, here's what I would say. A big part of it, it's wokeism. And one of the things I always say is the difference between foreign policy and domestic policy is grammatical, right? It is wokeism is the internal expression of the empire's rules-based order, right? Which works like this. Well, I hate the Chinese. Oh, look, the Chinese are doing bad things to Muslims in Xinjiang. The Chinese are stopping democracy in Taiwan. The Chinese are, and you just keep making up things, right? Because you hate the Chinese and you need a weapon to take them out, or the Russians or whoever it is, and you just keep making up things. Oh, they're doing this, they're doing that nonstop. To some extent, wokeism is that. What's interesting about wokeism is it is a blunt object that's used to smite your enemies. So if I don't like Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders, they're both, remember this, both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders were both accused of being racist, sexist, misogynist. Whether either of them are or not's a different point. They're both accused of it. Why? Because they're the enemies of the system, right? And you're going to accuse now Nicaragua. They don't like Nicaragua. They're against democracy. Mm-hmm. So it is using this moral high ground to attack your enemies and smite your enemies. You don't ever use it against your friends, right? Who are oftentimes violating the very, blatantly violating the very moral policies that you pretend to champion. You don't use it against, you don't say Saudi Arabia is against democracy. You say Nicaragua is against democracy. And you don't say Joe Biden has a credible accusation of sexual assault from Tara Reid. No, you say Donald Trump paid Stormy Daniels, so therefore he's got to go down. And I think Americans are getting hip to it. They may not connect the inward and outward expressions of wokeism and rules-based order, but at least in America, people are realizing this is not about equality. This is not about helping minorities. This is a self-serving racket to attack your enemies. And I think that's people are getting wise to that.
And honestly, probably it's going to be the case that any viable movement in the States to, like, a lot of the things that woke the community or the movement or whatever focuses on. I'll just take racial justice because Black Lives Matter, big thing last year. Any organization that's like pro-state or, I don't know, doesn't take a stand against the way that the American state and politicians within it constantly will appropriate these ideas. Any organization that doesn't very clearly stand against that stuff, isn't that, it's like a kind of tacitly standing up for it, because you know the politicians are going to come along, they're going to support it. Politicians are going to sort of use this to launder their own reputation or whatever, to clean themselves and give, okay, I stand for something, that kind of thing. And yet any viable movement to actually solve these things is going to need to go up against the state. And in other words, if any one of these orgs, and I'm focusing on racial justice, but you can apply it in other domains too, if any one of these orgs doesn't stand against politicians coming in, doesn't make it a big case, and just decides to let it happen because of publicity or whatever, they're kind of contributing to the problem. It seems to me that they're making it worse. Garland, we've got to close it out. Any thoughts on that?
I agree with you 100%. Wokeism hurts the cause. Wokeism is using minority communities as human shields, because wokeism, if I say you said something against trans or against women or whatever, I'm not saying how can we use that to advance the cause of equality for these groups. I'm saying under wokeism, how can I use that to beat the living heck out of you and to destroy your career? Well, you know what? That's going to have the opposite effect. You're just using people for human shields, and people in these groups need to wake up and realize they're being had.
Garland, thank you for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. Good talking with you.
Thank you.
And for those listening, the voice you just heard, Garland Nixon, he is the host of The Critical Hour. He's also a Sputnik political analyst. Check out The Critical Hour every Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern here on Radio Sputnik. Also follow Garland on Twitter at Garland Nixon, and check him out on Facebook and YouTube. And he is active on YouTube. He's posting videos over there, so go check him out. Again, Garland Nixon joining us. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into our break, coming back, taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Be back on the other side of this break with open lines.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And again, we're taking your calls. One thing, just sort of breaking news. Jamarl, I see you. It sounds like you have your own breaking news. What do you?
Well, it is. So, a crew member on the set of Rust, this was the movie, Alec Baldwin, basically they killed a person and shot the other person. Apparently, they were bit by a snake, or no, a venomous spider, and they end up losing their arm.
Ooh.
All of this stuff is taking place at the movie set. I mean, just No, I was just shaking my head like, wow, talk about bad luck.
Yeah, maybe, exactly, bad luck. Maybe that's dust common, and maybe we're only noticing it because we already noticed the story.
Yeah.
You know, people get snake bites, and I don't know how the prevalence of movie sets, or they're being reckless.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, what are you guys doing there? What happened? Anyway, the news was U.S. is reopening borders today, has reopened borders to fully vaccinated passengers from abroad. And one thing on this, it's just interesting. I'd seen, Sinbad come and talk about this over the weekend. With France, they opened borders to vaccinated travelers from the U.S. back in June. It has been 5 months with France specifically where they've let us into the country. We haven't let them in, even though America...
Europe in general.
Europe in general, even though America is at the top of the stack in terms of COVID problems.
Yeah, it was very weird. I didn't realize that we were keeping people out until I was traveling. And, Biden will come out saying eventually we're going to open the borders. Like, really? Our borders are still closed?
So when?
Yeah. I mean, Europe had been opening. I mean, yeah, because we can travel to Europe.
Just in time for summer, right?
Yeah.
All the tourists coming to, no, it's, I'm kidding.
It's pretty wild. I mean, the fact, the quid pro quo stuff looked like it would have been in effect. Yeah. Meaning it's like, well, look, we're not letting, I mean, you guys are the epicenter for this. What do you mean you're keeping us out? It looked like it would have been that. But that's not the way it went. For the most part, Europe basically allowed us in.
Maybe we were magnanimous. Maybe it's like, for your sake, you can't come here. It's too dangerous.
Oh, right. I know.
Don't come.
But I think Europe is probably looking at it as vacation dollars. It's like our vacation industry is ramping back up. If America doesn't want us in, that's on them. You can lose that vacation money. We want it. It could be something like that too.
Totally. But why wouldn't we have the same argument? America's a big tourist destination. Two things come to mind. Yeah. Either it was just weren't competent enough that it took the government a long time to get to this, or they were worried, travelers coming in brings more spread. The assumption with that second thing is that we can't handle it in the way that Europe thinks they can, because they reopened their borders and we haven't. Either one of those sides, I don't think it makes America look good. Why is this taking so long?
Yeah. Why can you basically contain the spread? I don't know, maybe 750,000 deaths in their head. We can't take any chances on bringing anybody in, even if it's a small potential for spread. And because I don't see the big difference. I mean, if oftentimes when you're going into Europe, you have to have either vaccination or you have to have a check within 3 days. And so if that was the same policy in the States, I don't see the issue associated with that.
I know, I hear you on that one. And maybe there is something there where they're super, and that would be a good third included option. They're just genuinely very concerned about the risk of spread, so they don't want people coming in.
Yeah.
I would still say, in the case of Europe, they could make the same argument. They've handled it better. It's weird that we're prioritizing that despite our problems. Maybe we're prioritizing it because of our problems, but here's another take on it. I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I went up to New York City this weekend, just hanging out with my brother, riding around the city for a little bit and stuff, just there for a day. Anyway, went up. On the bus ride up, everybody's wearing masks. On the bus ride back, everybody's wearing masks. But in Brooklyn, everybody inside bars, maskless, completely maskless. Now, on the one hand, it makes sense. You're drinking, everybody's inside. I get it. But on the other hand, there's like, the poverty class thing. Broadly, the people on the bus were a lot poorer than the people in the bar. And everybody who was on the bus wearing their mask, nobody in the bar are wearing their mask. It's just this weird asymmetry. My point being, if the American leaders are so cautious about this stuff, they're clearly not in touch with the American public, or, and I'm not even talking about the hoi polloi or whatever. They're wealthy, I'm sure, liberal supporters who are not wearing masks in bars, who don't share those precautions. My point is, it's just a weird response.
Yeah.
That's where I'd go with it.
Especially for bars. If I remember, weren't they shutting down bars or something at one point when all of this was starting? Their concern was that the people, the small quarters, have a higher propensity for spread and everything else. By the same token, again, this goes back to the whole restaurant thing. If you're eating in a restaurant, you can't eat with a mask on. And so it's like, how does that work? That is a little weird.
Yeah, it's super weird.
Yeah.
It's super weird. Again, I'll put it like this. It's not just the wealthy. Our own political leaders, Mayor Muriel Bowser here in D.C., pictured indoors. I've shown you the picture with other women at her side, none of them wearing masks. They're all indoors. And this is as she had reimposed, just after she'd reimposed the mask mandate when cases started to rise again just a couple months ago. Yeah. Over in San Francisco, other side of the country, Mayor London Breed, a couple months ago, again, full mask mandate in the city. This was literally, they had a marathon and they were forcing people to wear masks during the marathon in San Francisco.
Wow.
Meanwhile, she, at a bar, listening to The Roots, great band, nothing wrong with that. But
Rocking out. No mask.
Surrounded by people, a couple of the Black Lives Matter founders there with her, at least one, I remember that. But anyway, none of them wearing masks. So these are our leaders. And yet, on the other hand, you have, I guess, the Fauci establishment or whatever, which is very, if you take your tack on that, very cautious about this. It's just this weird mismatch that's not going to bode well for our dealing with the virus.
Yeah. Not to mention the numbers. New York, especially since it's New York. New York was one of the worst cases in the country at one point. That Cuomo was basically trying to massage and make it look like it wasn't as bad as it was. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, hopefully the numbers are going down. Fingers crossed. That's the hope. But we'll see.
We'll see. We got Michael calling in from Silver Spring, and 202-521-1320 is the phone number if you want to join us. Michael, you're on. What's on your mind?
Hi. Yeah, I agree with the COVID situation. I just feel like it's too late. I mean, no matter what the solution, what the answer is to the questions you guys just posed, it's too late. Because, how do I explain this? I mean, it's just like, I don't know. It just feels like if I'm an adult, it should make sense. If I go to the doctor's office and I don't understand the doctor, then why am I going to take action? If the doctor wants me to the doctor has an obligation, a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that I understand, and fiduciary just means, I don't know. But then another question I want to ask, one thing I thought of also, a separate issue is, what do you think about, is it possible that Russia controls all of Asia, including China?
I do not see why that would. I mean, it's possible because anything's possible, but no, I don't see why. I don't believe that to any degree.
Why do you think that, Michael?
That seems so improbable. It seems like China's the one with the raging economy and the much 10 times the population of Russia. And granted, Russia has larger territory, and you might argue more resources or something like that. But industrially, China seems to be doing better. Anyway, I see no reason to assume that second thing, Michael. Why do you think that?
I thought that because someone mentioned it. They did a lot of research. Their name's Jordan Maxwell. They mentioned it in passing. Vietnam, the V-I-E-T, it's similar to Soviet.
Wait, no, dude, Vietnam, I know this because I play historical strategy games. Dai Viet, a local kingdom in Southeast Asia, centuries old. The Soviet Union, birthed in the 20th century, that's a lot newer. My point is Vietnam, there's a much deeper history there. Your buddy Maxwell, you can do this research yourself, man. Your buddy Maxwell there does not know what he's talking about.
Okay, well, yeah.
Look it up, Dai Viet, two words, D-A-I space V-I-E-T. That's a historical predecessor to modern-day Vietnam existing in the region. My point is, culturally, there's a long history there.
Gotcha. Well, I researched Vietnam War, and I found that the Russians provided a lot of the weapons to the Vietnamese.
Yes, it was a big ideological battle between capitalism on one side and communism on the other side. That was the whole reason for the Vietnam War happening. It was basically, U.S. against the Soviets and the Chinese, and kind of both of them rolled in there.
We give weapons all across the world.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we own the place that we give weapons to.
But they also provide weapons for other Asian countries also. I mean, don't they provide all their weapons for Afghanistan and?
No, what I mean is just because somewhere provide weapons, there could be an ideological struggle, meaning I may be against your interests. Like when the United States was in a war with Britain, France was supplying weapons and resources to the United States in that. Didn't mean that France owned America. It just means that there's an ideological position that you take that you're against or for a particular side and you want to assist the side that you're for. It doesn't mean that you own it, if that makes sense. It's like Iran doesn't own the Houthis, and yet they assist them in their kind of political struggle in Yemen. It's the same thought or same difference. Does that make sense, Michael?
Not really.
Michael, just because, let me ask you this. Do you believe that when a country supplies weapons to another country, that they own that country, just by definition?
No.
Okay. So why do you believe in this situation, or using the argument that, well, they're supplying weapons to them and they supply weapons to the region, ergo they have, I guess, own those countries? What if you don't take it as an absolute? Why are you taking it as an absolute in the case of Russia and China?
Because it doesn't, the economy, if we owe China trillions of dollars and we're still questioning whether we're superior to them or whether they have control of us because they have the financial resources, which I think is
nobody's questioning that, Michael.
Okay, so with Russia, I think that the confusion is that I just think that, you know, if you, over the long run, countries develop relationships with other countries. If we sit down as leaders of each prospective country, we do a business deal together where we divide the land. Then 5 years later, we come back and we divide the land again. The relationship is going to be stronger than before.
Usually that stuff happens through wars. I don't know exactly what you're talking about there, Michael, and we're going into the last minute of our hour here, so we're going to have to close. But Michael, thank you for the call. Interesting conversation. And fiduciary basically means it's like a relationship. What'd you say?
Monetary relationship.
Well, no. Fiduciary means sort of like it's a trust relationship, basically. You have somebody who's representing you. You have an institution or a person who's representing you in some way. Who, you know, there's a sort of trust relationship where you have to rely on them, and you get into principal agent problems. You can look that up. Principal agent problem. Basically, they're supposed to represent you, but they've got their own interests. They're self-serving. And so in the course of supposedly representing you, they just do what they want. They benefit themselves anyway. It's this problem that comes up. But we've got to go into our hour break. We'll be coming back in a minute with headlines and the last hour of this morning's show. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it's time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states we call America and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am your indefatigable, ever vigilant, last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get into headlines. It's 9 a.m., November 8th, and it's time now for our last batch of headlines this morning. Yesterday in the United States, there were 22,085 new COVID cases reported. There were also 132 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 72,436 cases per day. That is effectively no change from the average 2 weeks ago. 58% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 67% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. And as of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 46,449,331 people across the United States. It's killed 754,051 people here in the U.S. The Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that researchers are investigating a link between COVID-19 vaccines and myocarditis. That's heart inflammation. The CDC has listed on its website an incidence of myocarditis among some of those usually receiving their second vaccination, particularly among adolescents and young males. Usually these are cases that resolve quickly, are fairly mild, usually. The CDC recommends that anyone who gets the symptoms visit the hospital. The symptoms include chest pain, shortness of breath, and the feeling of a fast or fluttering heart. I'd actually seen somebody that I know on Twitter talking about this just before I saw the Wall Street Journal post that, they'd gotten their, I forget if it was a booster shot or a second shot in their case, but they got it and they like had these symptoms. They looked it up. I think that was on Friday or Saturday. Anywho, the United States has this morning reopened its borders to vaccinated travelers. Big deal here. Like I said earlier, France opened its borders to the U.S. back in June. It's been 5 months now. It's just a weird asymmetry in that relationship. We were kind of going over this about 10 minutes ago. In national news, political news, on Friday, the House passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework Bill. That's without passing the Build Back Better spending plan, the contents of which have been the subject of a months-long competition between progressive and centrist Democrats. No schedule has been set yet for voting on the latter bill. The FBI raided the home of James O'Keefe on Saturday after raiding the homes of two Project Veritas associates late last week. Project Veritas is a controversial media organization that works with informants and publishes private interactions with left-leaning organizations. The FBI is investigating Ashley Biden's diary, which was stolen. Rappers Travis Scott and Drake are being sued after 8 people died and dozens of others were injured during a stampede at an overcrowded Travis Scott concert. Travis Scott continued to perform during that stampede and as medical professionals arrived at the scene. Today, the Supreme Court will be hearing a case about the government's ability to get lawsuits thrown out of court by claiming they would reveal secrets threatening to national security. The case involves a group of Muslim men from Southern California who filed a class action lawsuit claiming that the FBI spied on them and hundreds of others following the September 11th attacks. They claimed religious discrimination. The case was dismissed by a lower court due to the government saying that if it went forward, it would reveal quote-unquote state secrets. And then specifically, I didn't get into this earlier in the hour, but Craig Monteil, I believe that's how you pronounced his last name, is the sort of informant guy that they set up to do what seems to me to be entrapment in this case. He's basically a massage therapist who, this is his sort of cover, moves out to SoCal, tries to get into the Muslim community. You know, this is his cover again. Yeah. Converts to Islam, is a massage therapist, and, you know, becomes a part of a couple of mosques, at least one mosque, starts to circulate in the community, and then starts to talk about, like, waging jihad and stuff. Geez. And then other people in the organization and in the local community report him. Yeah. Saying, you know, to the FBI, saying this guy is crazy and violent. That's a problem. Yeah. It's a problem, exactly. And eventually he gets moved on. Anyway, in the course of investigating this stuff and saying they were basically unjustly spied on, there's this weird thing, just targeting them based on their religious beliefs, literally nothing more than their religious beliefs. It's just because they were Muslims. They are pursuing this case. Lower court denied it. We'll hear it today in the Supreme Court and see where this goes. A big one in terms of precedents, I think. Yeah. Whether a lawsuit can go forward if it would reveal state secrets, whatever those are. Do we live in freaking Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union where quote-unquote state secrets can be used to throw suits out of court? Because when is that not going to be used by an increasingly tyrannical government? That's the fear, right?
That's the point. And we do that. I mean, that's kind of policy, right? It was like, hey, this is a state secret, so we can't disclose what we're taking place. And like I said before, a lot of times it's waste, fraud, and abuse and embarrassment that they don't necessarily want to deal with. And so they hide this stuff in state secrets. Yeah. I mean, the catch becomes, and the question is always, you know, in a government that's somewhat of a democracy or representative government, how do you make decisions if you don't know what they're doing behind the scenes? Like, how could I make a decision of saying, yes, I want to support this policy or support the other policy if you have no idea what they're doing because all that stuff is in the black? I think that's where we are. So this is going to be a fascinating case. Yeah. Fascinating.
In sports news, in international news, pardon me, this morning, former American President Barack Obama will address the COP26 climate change conference that has been ongoing for more than a week. It will be ending this Friday, and we've already hit that a couple of times. We had Paul Beckwith on, who's a climate change activist. We're planning on speaking again with him later on this week. In sports news, on Friday, while appearing on the Pat McAfee show, Aaron Rodgers, quarterback for the Green Bay Packers, said that he was, quote, in the crosshairs of the woke mob right now, end quote. That's over his vaccination status. He also said that the media was on a, quote unquote, witch hunt to find out which players were vaccinated. He previously announced back in August that he was immunized, quote unquote, but it turns out he's unvaccinated and has been following protocols as if he was vaccinated. In business news, Tesla CEO Elon Musk said he would sell 10% of his Tesla stock on Saturday. That's after 57% of Twitter users voted yes in a poll that he posted this weekend. He put the choice of whether to sell $28 billion worth of his stock up to his Twitter audience. He says he was prepared to accept either outcome after the voting ended. And in holiday news, we've gone through a couple sets of these so far this morning. Today is World Orphans Day, Global Entrepreneurship Week, and World Kindness Week. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're back.
Yes.
Yeah, the thing with we didn't really talk about that earlier this morning. The Supreme Court with the case, heard about that just before the show started. Thank you, you-know-who, for sending that in. That's a big, big deal.
It is a very big deal. I like what that means. I mean, if the government can't continuously use, or if there are new provisions around, okay, this is weight, fraud, and abuse, if there are new provisions around this notion of state secrets, that's a big, big deal.
If I'm understanding this correctly, and it has the kind of, it would set the kind of precedent that we just set up there, which is, like, okay, state secrets, what does that mean? How many lawsuits are going to involve state secrets? And what can we find out? as particularly think about like whistleblowers. How can you have a case with a whistleblower? Say a whistleblower tries to come out, they get squelched, they get a little bit of traction or something like that, and then there's this suit investigating them. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's a punishment.
Right.
How is this going to affect that? Yeah. Admittedly, it's not a lawsuit brought by somebody against the state. It's the state bringing the lawsuit against somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But still.
Well, and there's also the secondary question: how and who's going to make the determination on whether a state secret is a state secret? Like, for example, if let's say a lawsuit is brought up, either the person is bringing it against the government or vice versa, and when the person is pressing on the government say, "Hey, we can't expose that. That's a state secret." Well, who's making the choice that something is a state secret? Especially because my thought is you can't let the state entirely decide what's a state secret, because the state would always want to keep that stuff private. They had to add in the Freedom of Information Act or freedom of FIFAs for that very specific point, that the state oftentimes wants to keep state stuff secret. And so is this going to be some kind of ruling associated with, okay, this is the criteria in order to meet a state secret? Is there going to be something where the judicial branch gets involved in hearing it to make a determination on it? Or are they going to leave it be? That's what I mean when I say it's a fascinating case. I mean, how far does the state secret clause go? And is the Supreme Court basically going to curtail it? I got to be honest, I have a hard time believing that they are, just because they have so many conservative justices and oftentimes they lean towards this kind of power dynamic. But
yes,
who knows?
Two things here, both sort of related, both having to do with Biden, and both of these are dark. Well, not dark. Technically dark in a way that you'll understand maybe when we get back to. Yeah, but I guess juvenile, both juvenile. So I'm going to start with the one that we didn't actually talk about earlier this morning, Jamarl. Did you hear about the conspiracy theory, or it's not a conspiracy theory technically, just the rumor about Biden and the whole meeting with the Pope and why it lasted so long?
No.
Somebody brought this up in the chat, and I saw it and was like, okay, I need to look into this real quick. So I gave it a quick search. Apparently, there's a rumor going around that got a lot of traction on Twitter that Biden, and again, this is juvenile, pooped his pants during the meeting with the Pope.
Oh, God.
And that's why it took so long. So that gets like 30,000 likes and retweets. But the more serious and legit one that we were talking about this morning, again, it's nothing.
Well, he cut one in front of somebody.
Well, he cut one in front of somebody, exactly. During, what was this?
I think it was like
during the COP26 climate summit. Yeah, exactly. Somebody heard him ad break when.
Is it royalty or something like that? But yeah, he cut one. And apparently she was like, it was loud. It was sustained.
Now, here's the thing, man. On the one hand, why are we bringing this up? It's stupid and juvenile, and we're stupid and juvenile for bringing it up. On the other hand, why are people saying these kinds of things about Biden? It's not just because they're mean. It's because he's old.
Yeah.
And the political establishment has never really addressed Biden, as far as I know, Biden being old, all of the legitimate concerns that people have over his cognitive degeneration. That's a real issue. So if I can take it to a real level for a second, the reason that people think these things and the reason that people are focusing on this stuff, because people fart, whatever, the reason that people care about this is he's an old dude who is incontinent and maybe is mentally incontinent and whatever, is making all these decisions, can't keep track of himself. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's where I would go to get a little bit more serious about it.
Yeah, it's an age thing. I mean, that's the only reason to bring it up. Nobody brought up Obama doing something like this. Yeah, the first one I don't necessarily buy. I need a lot more.
I saw Snopes. I don't necessarily trust Snopes, but Snopes said it was false.
Yeah.
There you go.
So there's that part. The one cutting one in front of the person, I do believe that one. That one sounds more accurate. And apparently the woman who basically was saying it, she was like shocked by the whole thing, and she wouldn't stop talking about it. Like, the president of America did so and so.
Yeah.
That is kind of wild. I mean, I guess to your point. When he was running in the election, people kept making a point of saying he doesn't seem to be altogether there. And sometimes he would forget where he is. Sometimes he would forget the people's name. I think he forgot Obama's name once. And this would be something that would just trail him along. And because of that, it set the context to the way people saw Biden. I mean, when he fell asleep at the climate summit, that looks horrible for a world leader to do that. And oftentimes he seems to have an inability to even communicate what he's trying to say at any particular point.
And let's think about this for a second. COP26, long-lasting event where he does not have control. The Americans don't have control over the cameras.
Correct.
Biden's forced to sit there, which is why we're seeing and hearing this stuff.
Yes.
Why we're seeing him fall asleep and hearing about the farts.
Yeah, because otherwise he'd be, in his White House.
He'd be in his White House.
Himself.
Exactly. And the American media wouldn't cover it, press, whatever. It wouldn't come up. The point is, this is who he is. This is what's happening. And then again, it's not just him. It's not just cognitive degeneration stuff. It's also corruption. His family apparently either using him or him allowing his family to use him, whatever, with the Hunter Biden art sales and the Secret Service agents going to look into the laptop that he lost, and then the diary that his daughter lost or somebody stole or whatever, that now the FBI, DOJ looking into. Again, when do we live? Is this 1721 or 2021? Are these like court servants of the royal monarch reigning, or do we live in a democracy where ostensibly these people are supposed to represent us and not merely get what they want out of us? I don't know.
It's very weird stuff.
It is.
I want to see more information on the daughter's book. That's very weird to me. Under normal circumstances, it looked like you could publish that regardless. Meaning, if O'Keefe didn't steal it himself, where he didn't, there was an issue back in the UK where, what is the name of it? I can't think of the name of the company. But they were spying on the phone of various people's answer machines and stuff. I can't think of the name of it. I believe it was doing this to royalty. And so that gets to be Rupert Murdoch.
News International.
Right. So that gets to be problematic in general. You're basically breaking into somebody's phone. I don't know if the same provisions apply if you steal somebody's book. I don't even know how you would steal somebody's book like that. But either way, it's a very weird case that the FBI is showing up basically over a diary. So
yes.
I don't know I don't understand the details of that one.
The optics here, I'll put it like this. A lot of people on the right broadly are the ones paying attention to this stuff. Certainly there are people on the left who pay attention to it, almost all of them on the fringe. But my point is there's a long train of all these weird stories that you can find pretty easily if you know where to look and if people send them to you. And the shift of Democrats moving over to Republicans, moving over to the right as they get disgruntled with Biden, when more and more of those people start finding out about these stories, start sharing them, I could see very quickly the sea change getting a lot more of a turning into a turmoil. My point is, I don't know. I think the narrative on Biden could shift pretty darn rapidly once a lot of the stuff that was suppressed in the lead up to the election, like the Hunter Biden laptop story specifically, that starts to come out. People start talking about it. Suddenly, maybe even mainstream media is forced to turn on it in the same way that they've sort of quietly turned on Russiagate. Who knows if it starts to get less quiet? I don't know. There's a weird shift right now.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I mean, at this point, Biden's approval rating is in the toilet. So I don't even know what that shift would look like. I mean, it would just be the unraveling at that point. And if you think about it, he hasn't had a good presidency. I mean, it's been chaos from the time that he's got in office to now. I mean, this is the first thing that he passed with the exception of the COVID bill. And again, I don't give him credit for the COVID bill just because Trump was going to pass the COVID bill for basically 1.8 trillion, I believe Trump was trying to pass. Biden did it for 1.9 trillion. But you get my point. In a presidency that had all of these provisions that he wanted to get accomplished, he basically got none of them accomplished. And his first win came in, we're 8 months out or something to that effect within an administration. They're basically going into the second year. This does not bespeak of a positive or success story. And to Garden's credit, I honestly believe that I think it's hard to shake people out of the perspective that's created over the course of the last 6-7 months. His party is doing him no favors on this stuff at all. Yeah. So I don't know. I would say this, though. I do want to hear more about why the FBI showed up at the door. But even taking the FBI out of it for the moment.
Not just showed up the door, raided the place. Yeah, through the door is the idea there.
Through the door, thank you, Right, basically knocked the door down. But from the standpoint of the Secret Service agent that was supposedly working for Biden to go and deal with things for Hunter, all of that stuff is very weird, especially since he wasn't supposedly working. Biden wasn't even president. Full stop, right? And this guy's still going out and basically knocking some sense into Hunter Biden on behalf of Joe Biden. It's just very weird stuff.
It is weird. I don't like it at all, and we got to keep talking about it. We're going into our break, folks. We will be coming back with Lee Stranahan, talking about a couple of things. We're going to be hitting these two bills. We were talking about this, of course, earlier with Garland, basically infrastructure bill that passed on Friday without also simultaneously passing the spending plan that progressives and centrist Democrats have been arguing about since time immemorial. For months now, for a long time, but it feels like time immemorial. Anyway, we're going to be talking about that. I also want to come back to this John Durham case. We've got a couple things to talk about with Lee Stranahan, Sputnik News analyst and host of The Backstory here on Radio Sputnik, also former host of this show, and my dad. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back with Lee in just a minute. Be right back.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us. From mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Quick heads up, folks. We will not be taking calls at the end of the hour. We're going to be joined by Wyatt Reed from 9:45 to the end of the show, talking about the results of yesterday's election in Nicaragua. Also talking right now with Lee Stranahan, Sputnik News analyst and host of The Backstory, airing Monday through Friday on Radio Sputnik from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. Follow him on Twitter at Stranahan. Lee, Dad, thanks for joining us. How are you doing this morning? Are you there? Can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, you could. How are you doing? Pardon me, just couldn't hear you. How are you doing?
No, I'm great. Thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being with us. Let's get into it. Let's start with the bill. On Friday, the House passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework, shortened to the BIF bill. That's without passing the Build Back Better plan. The big spending package, $3.5 trillion as of about a month ago, now diminished to $1.75 trillion. We've been talking about this for a very long time. Anyway, the idea for a while there that progressives had was delay the passage of the infrastructure bill so they can use this as leverage to get stuff into the spending bill. The thinking being Democrats have the House, they have the Senate, and of course, they have the presidency. That has not worked out. And as time has worn on, the two bills have been detached. And then on Friday, crucially, the infrastructure bill got passed, and now the second one hasn't. And we'll see about it. But the point is, this leaves the Democrats in the weak position. It leaves Biden specifically in a weak position. And after last week's victory for the Republicans in Virginia, I don't know that Friday was such a big accomplishment, even though technically getting the infrastructure bill passed is a good thing. Lee, what's your take on all this?
Well, first off, we in a very real and meaningful way, we don't actually know what's in the bill right now, because as is typical with these big omnibus bills, they just pass them without reading them. They're too big and unwieldy. And by the way, Republicans do that as well as Democrats. This is what Congress has done in the past few years. Pass first and then read it later. And so in a very real and meaningful way, we actually don't even know what's in it. And that's bad for a couple reasons. Here's very easy to predict news cycle. What you're going to hear on the left and the right in the media coming up are bad things that are in the bill. It's the easiest story in the world to write. You just wait. Someone's going to read the bill, right? Some journalist, then they'll find something they don't like. And again, they're going to be different things. Somebody on the right's going to find some pork program they don't like, and someone on the left will find some corporate giveaway they don't like, and then they'll report the bad things. What you won't see, because you've never seen this story, is 5 awesome things that are in the bill, right? You've never seen that story in your life. And I'm not saying there's nothing good in the bill. I don't know. I haven't read it. But politically, this is just going to cause further problems. And let's point out the Democrats control the House and the Senate. So they can't even, in a sense, they don't have anyone to blame when this bill, the bad things come out. And guaranteed there will be corporate giveaways, and guaranteed there will be stupid pork. That's all going to happen. So, I don't think it's certainly not the white knight to politically save the Biden administration. I don't see any white knight coming to save the Biden administration right now.
Yeah, you don't think that this is going to have any kind of effect on the way the public is perceiving Biden and this kind of comparison or juxtaposition against the Republican Party? Also, do you think that if this bill was passed earlier, that it would have changed the perspective of the Biden administration? I mean, granted, Biden had all sorts of problems, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's COVID, or whether it's just trying to get his agenda passed in general, not to mention the things that he said he was going to do that he had power to do, like the marijuana legalization, or at the very least changing the scheduling of that particular drug. Do you think that if this was passed earlier, McAuliffe would have had a better chance? And I guess what I'm asking is what's taking place in Congress having an adverse effect on how Democrats are being perceived in the various states?
I don't think this had any effect on the McAuliffe, the Virginia governor election. I don't think it had anything to do with that. I think it contributes to a view of the Biden administration as inept. Mm-hmm. And I think that Afghanistan helps create that narrative too. The way they did the pullout, and then let's say them murdering 7 children.
Yeah.
You know, I thought that was a big deal. Yeah. But it certainly shows that they're not good at doing things. And I think that this shows that the Democrats can't claim to be, the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party establishment can't claim to be the adults in the room who are good at getting things done. They're not. They're showing that they're very bad. Now, I think Terry McAuliffe was hurt by his statements on education and the fact, and very few people have actually talked about this, that the COVID agenda that he has currently is killing him with 2 constituencies, black voters and union voters, that the Democrats have counted on, right?
I heard somebody bringing up the union thing specifically, too. I heard somebody bring that up recently, and in the context of Virginia, I actually think that's a big deal, and thank you for bringing that back up. I think the idea there being, and sorry for cutting in briefly, just the vaccine mandates, right? You know, you're going to go up against unions who are having to deal with workers, and that's a big thing to ask of a lot of people.
Well, and here's the thing, too. You can separate out 2 issues. As you guys do here on Fault Lines, we love Ted Rall, and Ted's a frequent guest on our show. I don't know any human being who's been vaccinated more than Ted Rall, right? He's been vaccinated 4 times.
Yeah,
cartoonist, author Ted Rall has been vaccinated 4 times.
I have no idea how. 2.
Right. I think he's got an IV drip going. But that being said, he's against the vaccine mandates. So what I'm saying is, you can separate out 2 issues. One, the vaccines, and that's, contentious, and there's opinions all over the place on that. But then there's the mandates. And the mandates, when you have a guy who's been vaccinated 4 times saying, I'm against it as a mandate, and I think Ted is completely right. Politically, this is a disaster. And it really did help suppress union and African-American votes in this last election. And look, we saw in the previous election that getting the black vote out, not this time, but last time, was key. They really did a good job for a variety of reasons. Charlottesville was fresh in people's minds, and that really got the black vote out. This time, I haven't seen those numbers yet, but I could tell before the election happened that it wasn't going to be out and enthusiastic. And it's the same thing. The union vote right now. And the other weird thing that's happening in the news cycle, obviously, is mysteriously plane flights are getting canceled left and right. Mm-hmm. Every weekend we hear, last weekend it was 800 flights on American canceled. And before that it was 2,000 flights on Southwest. And nobody seems to be saying, yes, this is about people pissed off about the vaccine mandate. It's just mysteriously the weather gets bad and 800 flights are canceled. And that's strange. The narrative on that of not even wanting to admit that, for instance, it's affecting air travel at a time when air travel is once again open. People can come over from, a number of countries, from the UK and so on, for the first time in a long time.
Yeah. As of this morning, sort of breaking news. We had just earlier when it went through.
Yes.
The time this morning. Another side of this, kind of riffing on that stuff, but a little bit more specific. Vaccine mandates for kids going into school. With the approval of the 5 through 11 vaccine, I keep bringing this up. In Virginia, a lot of the focus was on schools and children, and as always, that's going to get people out. That's going to get any parent pretty much thinking about that stuff, and you're going to have a bunch of parents who got vaccinated, I'm sure, to go back to work. In a lot of cases, they maybe grudgingly, whatever, but they're more or less okay with it. But with their kids, they're not going to want to cross that line. And I don't know the facts on this stuff. I'm broadly more pro-vaccination, especially than a lot of our listeners. But just yesterday, Wall Street Journal, is myocarditis, heart inflammation being associated with the vaccine, researchers looking into that. Valid concerns parents are going to have. I don't see this issue going away. We haven't really started to hit the vax mandate in schools conversation yet, but I see that being huge. I don't see that going away, and I see that being a big winning argument for Republicans. I don't know how Democrats could back down from it. Lee, what's your take?
Well, it's not even a Democrat-Republican issue exactly. What I mean by that is there are Republicans who have been in favor of vaccines. Donald Trump, for instance, was very heavily pushing the vaccine, and Operation Warp Speed was his administration, and so on.
But he also got booed.
He got booed when he brought it up, and kind of ignored a little bit. Remember that?
Yeah, no, and I understand that because a lot of Trump supporters forget how much Trump supported the vaccines, and so but with the children's mandate, or not the children's mandate, but the vaccine being available, and it's sort of a mandate in some ways, because they're easing in these stealth mandates. What I mean by that is, for instance, here in South Dakota, where I am currently, the biggest private employer is Sanford Health, where I've been in their hospitals. I've had good health care through Sanford, so I'm not anti them, but they're the biggest private employer. And they recently, up here in South Dakota, started suspending employees. And I didn't understand that. And a friend of mine who's worked in the healthcare field explained to me the Biden administration had said, your hospital won't get paid on, I believe it's Medicaid. Could be Medicare, but I always confuse them. But one of those things, we're not going to pay you unless you suspend people who aren't vaccinated. So is that a private choice? I would argue not. Now, it's not the same as the government saying you must or we'll do this to you. But when they hold millions of dollars in funding, if you don't follow it, that's an arm-twisting strategy, right? At best. And so that's what I mean. We get into, the Biden administration has been tricky about this. Sometimes they haven't wanted to come out and say, yeah, this is a mandate. But sometimes it's clearly a mandate. And, it's one thing if I hit you on the head and steal your wallet. It's another thing, if I threaten to kick your dog and I just say, I'm going to kick your dog. And then you give me the wallet. Well, okay, I haven't kicked the dog. I haven't hit you in the head, but it's still a threat.
It's
and
coercion.
That's what the Biden administration's doing.
It's coercion, right? That's a step away from completely violating somebody else's right to decide for themselves. It kind of reminds me of Cass Sunstein here, who an American legal scholar. He was an advisor in the Obama administration, also the author of this kind of influential book, Nudge, published back in 2008. I'm bringing him up. That book and what he brought to the Obama administration, what he brought into the White House, this idea of nudging people using policy to do what you want them to do, more or less. And there's a good way of painting this and a bad way of painting this. I get the government wants to be able to influence public behavior, public health, all these things. And in the American context, a lot of us are pretty libertarian-leaning. We don't want to be directly controlled, and so the government looks for ways to do this in ways that aren't going to directly control us. They try to nudge us in these different ways. But if you keep doing it, it's more and more coercive. And a lot of people rankle at it. Lee, you were saying something there. What's on your mind?
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mentioned two ways. I could hit you on the head and take your money, or I could threaten something and take your money that way, or I could make a good argument that if you give me money, I'll give you something of value, or you'll invest in something that will make you more money. See, that third way is also a nudge where you actually make a good argument, right? And I do that, everyone does that every day. You buy stuff. That's a nudge, right? Advertising's a nudge, right? But once you start to hit people on the head or threaten them, you don't feel like you have to make the argument anymore. And this is the danger of falling into that. The Biden administration has not made the case. They've not convinced people, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, to be fair, the mandates, this is 6-7 months into Biden's term, and the mandates came into fruition, last month or something to that effect, meaning where he started putting them out. So he did try to make the argument. You just had an obstinate 30%, give or take, that wasn't necessarily for it. I was looking at.
I would argue they never really tried to make the argument. Never, because they always
tried to make the argument for what? For vaccines?
Yes.
Well, Biden's entire administration was hinged. In fact, the only thing he hinged his COVID policy on were vaccinations.
Well, let me explain. The vaccine at first was pitched to everybody like, you need to take the vaccine because it stops the spread. You're protecting other people. Then when the medical facts came out that it didn't do that, they switched the argument. Now, this is not persuasive argumentation. When you suddenly just one day wake up and go, no, it's not about you protecting other people. You're less likely to go in the hospital if you're vaccinated. Now, with the children in particular, why should a child take the vaccine? Because we've established already the vaccines are not effective, particularly at keeping you from passing it on to other people. And the argument that they switched to, which is if you go in the hospital, you're more likely to survive, doesn't apply to children anyway. So all you've got is risk, like you pointed out, Shane, the heart inflammation and other stuff. But vaccines in general, there's a reason you don't just take medication randomly. And the vaccines, and some would argue that the term vaccine is not accurate, but okay. What's the upside versus the downside? The downside, there is a risk. And I'll tell you, all that's going to happen is at some point, some child will die of this, right? And let's use for purposes, let's just use little Shane, let's say. Ooh. So at some point, little Shane dies has a complication, even if it's a 1 in a million complication. If you vaccinate 1 million people, you're going to get one. You know what? Seeing the posters and the pins and the memes about little Shane died, you see what I'm saying? You're taller. You're okay, Shane. You're going to be fine.
The idea
I'm not trying to frighten you.
People are going to get pissed.
But Lee, how many kids have died from COVID?
Like
and do you
40
think,
total
right,
or something like that? But that's kind of my
point. If you're talking about 1 versus 40, it seems that even that seems to be between the two.
Yeah, right. Because they would say it was completely unnecessary. That's what the argument is.
That's the thing. So few kids have died from it that I will disagree slightly in that it does protect against transmission. It's just not perfectly. And,
exactly.
And going into the vaccination process, it wasn't ever made clear. No, this doesn't protect you completely. You can still spread it. When Biden, it was early June because it was a month out from 4th of July.
Right.
When Biden was talking about how when 4th of July comes and we're all vaccinated, we're all going to be able to get out and society's going to get back to normal again. And very quickly, they had to pivot on that because even though a lot of people got vaccinated, not everybody did, and then the vaccines weren't as effective, and these strains came up. It's these things that any authority on any medical authority should be able to foresee. The point is, I hear you completely in that the messaging was unclear, but still, it does protect against transmission, just on the sort of points effect thing.
And what I'm saying is their messaging pivoted.
Yeah,
they said at first it was the reason to take it is we're going to stop the spread. Then it was, okay, it's not stop. And by the way, those numbers, inarguably, were much lower than they touted them to be.
Yes, and they've
initially.
changed it. They've changed it repeatedly, and that is it. It discredits them for sure.
And that's what I mean. That's what I mean is ultimately the messaging. They didn't make a good argument, and then rather than have people who people trusted, they've got the woman who's in charge of the CDC and Fauci. Here's the thing: forget anything except large numbers of people don't trust either one of them, and therefore they're bad spokespeople. You want a spokesperson who people trust. And when you start to see this breakthrough into pop culture, from Joe Rogan to Nicki Minaj to LeBron, when that started to happen, they've got a PR disaster on their hand right now, because a lot of the messaging is coming from people who, whoever this quarterback, I don't follow sports.
Aaron Rodgers, the whole immunized conversation.
Aaron Rodgers, yeah.
Right.
So
basically.
But here's the thing. He now has as much credibility for a lot of people.
Yeah, for a lot.
How does he? Wait, he has credibility for lying?
No, but for a lot of people, I hear the argument, like the Nicki Minaj thing. I remember seeing, it was a weird thing. Trump was technically closer to like MSN or whatever, MSNBC on this one, than Nicki Minaj was.
Yes.
Who you'd think of, okay, she's some random pop culture icon.
Well, she says somebody's testicles swelled up or something after getting the vaccine. You believe that has credibility?
Well, but some people wouldn't. I get the point that he's making.
Look, man, you can find people that give credibility to pretty much anything. Flat earthers and everything.
This is a disaster for them.
I forget how many Instagram followers Nicki Minaj has, but it's millions.
I agree with you that it hasn't been a good messaging thing. Yeah, I do agree with that point. I would say this, though. 54% of the people in Virginia favored the vaccine mandates. And when you're going around the country, I'm telling you, it's not as high as I think you think it is for people who are against it, even though, yes, it may be adversely affect a particular political candidate. It's not the majority in these states.
And it kind of relates to the union conversation.
And just real quickly, the Biden administration, if they were trying to figure out how to play Nicki Minaj, they should have listened to Bees in the Trap first, because she makes her position quite clear.
That's pretty
funny. 100 mother effers can't tell her nothing. That's all I'm saying.
She's already out with that one. They should have taken her at her word on that. We want to go to Russiagate with Nicki Minaj just briefly. I remember Jen Psaki saying, we're trying to make contact with Nicki Minaj.
Yeah,
we're
she
trying
reached out to her or something.
They reached out to Nicki Minaj to personally convince her. And then I'm like, okay, I get what you guys are doing, but this is still bad optics. This doesn't look good, even though you might think it does. And then this is really the best thing you have to do, you guys, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, the best thing you have to do with your time is contact Nicki Minaj. I don't know, but it's just, they were in crisis, and they still are. But let's go to Russiagate. I will start with this. This is there was first Michael Sussman, of course, John Durham in his investigation into Russiagate, into the Mueller report, and into everything that very clearly went wrong there, has now two major scalps in the recent history. There was Michael Sussman, the Perkins Coie lawyer who, representing the DNC, went to the FBI, giving the Steele dossier, lying about who he was representing. He said he wasn't representing the DNC. Basically, it turns out he was. He's been indicted on that. Then last week, of course, in a big beat in this story, you have the arrest of Igor Danchenko, a Russian citizen for whatever that's worth, and also a guy who, doing research, working at the Brookings Institution, doing research, provided for the Steele dossier, relying on this other guy, Charles H. Dolan Jr., also lied. Anyway, you have these two major beats. I will go to you with this briefly. I've been seeing some people, and I've had it in my mind too. Is John Durham actually going to push this thing all the way through to the finish line? Is he going for something bigger with this? Or a lot of people, you kind of have these feelings of paranoia. Or does he work for the system too, and he's only going to go so far, and once he draws blood, he's going to back off because, we'll have done his work or whatever. But is he actually... I don't know how much you can judge of this, but from what you can tell, what's your take?
I have no faith. Durham's never going to get the real story. I've gotten the real story and been very consistent on it, and he's never going to get it, because the real story involves the theft of Russian assets in the 90s and how this is a cover-up, and it goes back to the Bill Clinton's administration, the only. I also said first, but it's really the only Clinton administration because Hillary lost. But this goes back to the Clinton administration, where people like Larry Summers, for instance, were part of the shock therapy plan in Russia. And it involves trillions of dollars in energy assets, companies like Gazprom, companies like Yukos Oil, and the attempted theft of that by the U.S. and the UK. Everything we've seen in Russiagate comes out of that. And the interesting, so in one sense, and Durham's never going to get there because it also involves Russiagate. I've always said this. Russiagate was more about trying to get Vladimir Putin out of power than it was about Donald Trump. Trump is, in a sense, a bystander. This is really about removing Putin from power. And this is really about people who want to remove him from power, like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, at one point the richest man in Russia, the oligarch in a real oligarch sense in the 90s, and Bill Browder, his spokesman, and people like that, who's effectively become the spokesman against Putin. At one point was enemies with Khodorkovsky, and now they're pals. And people like George Soros who are pushing that agenda of getting rid of Vladimir Putin so they could go back to stealing the way they did in the 90s. And the interesting thing about Chuck Dolan, well, I'd never heard of before, or researching him, and Shane, you know this because you've suffered through my reporting for years. I've said forever, this comes down to people who were close to Bill Clinton and close to Hillary Clinton, but it's Bill Clinton. And like Strobe Talbot, the guy who headed up the Brookings Institution, he was Bill Clinton's Oxford roommate in 1969. That's pretty close. The Shearer dossier came out of Cody Shearer. Brooke Shearer married Strobe Talbot. Derek Shearer was an ambassador, and they were key to getting Clinton elected. Well, let me tell you who else was key to getting Clinton elected. Chuck Dolan. Chuck Dolan ran the Clinton campaign in Virginia in '92. Previous to that, he was with the Democratic Governors Association that Bill Clinton was the head of. So this really goes back to late 80s, early 90s, and in the case of Talbot, 1969. In other words, these are people who are very close to Bill Clinton, because when you're doing an operation like this, and by the way, everything I'm saying is easily confirmable, but no one ever, a lot of the stories avoid discussing, they go, you know, I was reading a story this morning, they said he's theoretically Democrat connected. No, he's absolutely, positively Clinton connected. Anyone can look it up. He ran the Virginia Clinton campaign. He was with the DGA when Clinton was running it. And I went over to the Bill Clinton Presidential Library, the digital. I didn't go to Arkansas. I went to the digital version, and you can find references to Chuck Dolan throughout the Clinton administration. He's right there.
Yeah.
So it's not a guess, but it goes to what I've said. These are the people closest to Bill Clinton. Well, and that's people he trusted.
We've got to close out because, you know, we have another guest that we need to get to, and we're a little bit over time. But when I learned about Charles H. Dolan Jr., when I looked into him, Aaron Mate, of course, early on had been the one to very publicly speculate on this stuff, and then was proven correct just a couple hours later. Looking into him, one of the first things I was thinking is, okay, this guy's a Clintonite. It reminded me of Cody Shearer and the Shearer dossier and Strobe Talbot and that whole connection, and just a doubling down and a sort of verification, another piece of evidence backing up your idea. Not just that this was a Clinton plot, but why. And again, I think a good thing to keep in mind, the demonization of Russia. I kind of forget this occasionally, but I think you're right. With the Clintons specifically, with how they were associated with the Clinton administration in the 90s, and academia on the back end supporting the voucher privatization program and what that did to Russia and the genuine moral guilt in our relationship with Russia, they need to get as far away as possible. And the people who would know most about that and be the most involved in it in the Clinton administration were the ones behind this. There's a kind of natural conspiracy there out in the public. I think you were one of the only people to see. Thank you for doing the research. We got to close it out. Lee Stranahan, Dad, thank you for joining us. Good talking with you this morning.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'll just say, you got Wyatt Reed coming up. We've been so lucky here at Sputnik to have people like Wyatt Reed and Bob Schlehuber, who was in Ethiopia. Amazing international coverage from our colleagues here at Sputnik, and it's just great to be with this organization. There you go.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Lee.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Lee Stranahan, dad of mine, a Sputnik News analyst and host of The Backstory, airing Monday through Friday on Radio Sputnik. That's from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. Follow him on Twitter at Stranahan. Also check out populist.tv on YouTube. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. When we come back, we will be joined by Wyatt Reed, Sputnik News analyst and producer for By Any Means Necessary. That show airs here on Radio Sputnik every Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Actually, you know what? I think that's out of date. I think we got to rewrite that. I was reading that by default, but I think we got to go back to it. We'll get clear on it when we come back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. We'll be right back with Wyatt.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And speaking to what Lee was saying, that basically we have reporters in multiple parts of the world. Bob Schlehuber was in Ethiopia. He was my old partner on Political Misfits. He's still on Political Misfits. And of course, Wyatt Reed, writer and reporter for Sputnik, the Sputnik News Network. He is in Nicaragua. And of course, he's in Nicaragua for the presidential election that took place on Sunday. And so we're going to bring Wyatt on to get the feedback to what is taking place in that election, what are the chances, and also the kind of media perspective on this, because much of Western media has basically been calling the election a sham or not necessarily real, but having people on the ground gives a different take on those particular items. So, Wyatt, are you here? Can you hear me?
Oh, I can, yes.
Oh, there you are. Excellent. I was initially I thought that the channel might have died. I heard the Skype thing go up. How you doing? Excuse me. How are you doing today? Doing all right?
I'm good. How about yourself, Jamal?
So far, so good. Not too bad. So looking over Western media for the last couple of days, they've been calling this election everything but a child of God, basically saying it's a sham, basically saying the Ortega has become more authoritarian, even going so far as to say, oh, he's not even pretending anymore. He's locking up his political opponents. So you were there, and I've seen some of the other people that were there on site covering the elections. What has been your take of this elections? And has this election been what Western media is saying it is, basically that this was a sham, that these guys were putting political prisoners in prison, et cetera? What have you seen being there with your eyes on the ground?
Well, I've seen an opposition that doesn't seem to realize that the elections are fake, if that's what the case is. Nobody here seems to realize it, other than small but extremely vocal minority of wealthy Nicaraguans, most of whom don't actually live in the country itself, but tend to stoke division and anger from abroad. That's really who we're talking about having been, supposedly prevented from participating in this election. At the end of the day, the people that were being presented as political prisoners in the mainstream media, the Western press, are people who, in one way or another, effectively fomented a violent coup d'etat that left over 300 people dead. That's the kind of crime that, would get anybody locked in jail. They were never actually candidates for the presidency. It's also important to note they were been sort of retroactively given the label pre-candidate by the mainstream media. But what we witnessed last night was kind of a rejection of those opposition parties. So far we have the preliminary count has about 49% tabulated. That's the latest figures that we received late last night around 2 a.m. The Consejo Supremo Electoral, or Supreme Electoral Council, said that 49% of the voting stations have been tallied, and close to 75% of the votes have gone to the Sandinista front so far, at a voter turnout rate of about 65%, which I will say is higher than virtually any U.S. election in modern history. So when we're talking about sham elections, I mean, it's pretty rich that a country like the United States, where 2 of the last 4 presidents won significantly fewer votes than their opponents, they were which is to say they lost the popular vote. For a country like that to be giving out lectures on democracy, I think is a little bit rich. And, you know, so what we've seen so far from the press is lies in the New York Times. The New York Times has effectively invented their own parallel reality where voting stations were closed en masse. No one I've spoken with has any idea what this is referring to and has any idea what it could possibly refer to. None of us have been aware of any voting stations that have closed. Voting booths that I checked out yesterday were pretty packed, actually. You know, I witnessed, and I was in a pretty remote part of the country called Bilwi in the Atlantic coast. It's historically a stronghold of the opposition. It's a mosquito city. If we remember that Ronald Reagan famously stated, "I am a mosquito," as a way of sort of forging solidarity in his mind with the mosquito people who were being used by the CIA in their dirty war against Nicaragua. Well, that region now has a democracy, first of all, thanks to the Sandinista revolution, and second of all, it's pretty evident that they're using that vote. I witnessed hundreds of people going to the polls. Not something that you know, a country like Nicaragua would have the resources to fake any of this stuff for, you know, international observers. The other thing I wanted to touch on is the response by Joe Biden. He put out a statement pretty much immediately, very almost cartoonishly absurd kind of language, just absurdly dramatic to me. It's a little bit Trumpian. Biden called the election, he referred to it, as a pantomime election that was neither free nor fair and most certainly not democratic. He went on to compare the Ortega and Murillo family that now rule Nicaragua. He called them autocrats who are no different from the Somoza family that Ortega and the Sandinistas fought 4 decades ago. And of course, this is pretty rich coming from the country that funded the Somoza dictatorship, that put them in power, that kept them there for 43 years, and one of the bloodiest dictatorships in the region. And I made this point on Twitter. If the Nicaraguan government was actually no different from the Somoza family that Ortega and the Sandinistas fought, the U.S. would be shipping them hundreds of millions of dollars worth of weapons and not trying to overthrow them. And it's a pretty simple point. You know, the sheer chutzpah it takes to me is really unimaginable. But we know the consequences of this. We're already seeing the groundwork being laid for this country to be delegitimized internationally, for it to be treated like a pariah, like Venezuela and Cuba in the international media, for people to just be able to reflexively dismiss anything good that's happening there, because, you know, the mainstream media has decided that this country, which somehow represents a threat in that its economic system isn't capitalist enough, they've got to go. And that's what it seems like the U.S. government has decided. And of course, the media is happily following along.
Why do we still care, Wyatt? And thank you for joining us. But from your perspective, what are we afraid of in terms of Nicaragua? If I take the good faith approach to what the U.S. government is doing, is we genuinely see Nicaragua as, you know, an authoritarian state, socialist country. I'm sure there are plenty of people in the administration who are ideologically opposed to it. You know, just Cold War leftovers, that kind of thing. But there's also the question, in terms of actual material, tangible threats, why we would oppose this. Why the New York Times headline on the results of the election this morning was, Nicaragua descends into an autocratic rule as Ortega crushes dissent, quote unquote. Why is it that hyperbolic? What's on the line here, Wyatt?
Well, what's on the line here is effectively a new Cold War. We're watching recalibration of states within Latin America that are turning towards themselves, towards ideas of regional integration. You start seeing real collaboration between countries that have historically been victimized by U.S. imperialism, historically treated as part of this this sort of feudal kingdom of the Monroe Doctrine. They're increasingly looking to one another for support, trying to find ways to amplify regional cooperation, sort of self-determination on a regional level. So you need to effectively remove any of the good examples that have withstood the test of time. This is why we see, despite Obama having briefly warmed relations with Cuba, we are now back in a Democratic administration. Things are worse than they've been in decades in terms of U.S.-Cuban ties. It's a similar case with Venezuela as well. Despite having brief sort of periods of détente, and this goes, of course, with Bolivia too. Despite periods in which it seemed the U.S. government was willing to accept, for the time being, that a socialist state could exist and participate within the international economy.
We just keep coming back to that line, and we've got to close it out here. But I hear you. Wyatt Reed, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your work over there. He's a writer, reporter, and political analyst working with Sputnik News. Check out his work at SputnikNews.com and follow him at Wyatt Reed 13 on Twitter. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Have a great day, folks. See you on the other side.